ha inchiodato la discussione su pro di sì, pro di no, senza entrare nel merito della complessità della fase politica. Mi è sembrato questo un dato molto negativo, perché se dovesse prevalere questo atteggiamento, rischiamo un partito burocratico e rigido, tutto schiacciato dalla pratica correntizia, che ci porterebbe molto lontani dal partito plurale che invece tutta e tutti dobbiamo concorrere a costruire. Siamo nel pieno di una crisi, guerra, crisi economica, l'Europa che non riesce a rappresentare un'alternativa alla globalizzazione, il fallimento di tutte le promesse annunciate dalle politiche neoliberiste. Il mezzogiorno è dentro questa crisi che proviene... Grazie. Il mezzogiorno è dentro questa crisi che proviene dal mondo e rischia di diventare un luogo separato, una specie di zona franca dove potrebbero prevalere le pratiche illegali e la militarizzazione del territorio. In questo mezzogiorno le politiche neoliberiste hanno volti noti: lo sfruttamento dell'operaio Tata, le vecchie precarietà fatte di lavoro nero a cui patti territoriali e contratti di area non hanno fornito alcuna risposta, come invece preannunciavano, mostrano l'aspetto dell'aggressione del territorio. Qui si realizzano dei veri e propri ossimori. Petrolio e parco, per esempio, convivono nella stessa area segnando l'uno il confine dell'altro. Portano il segno di una crisi democratica e di relazioni senza precedenti, abbattendo qualunque forma di welfare, indebolendo ulteriormente i servizi sociali sul territorio, dalla chiusura degli ospedali alle scuole. In questo mezzogiorno convivono forme arcaiche di produzione con sperimentazioni post-fordiste e convivono anche stili di vita omologati con forti ricerche identitarie. Qui si accumulano il massimo della precarietà, dell'incertezza, della disuguaglianza, il massimo della crisi di panico sociale. E proprio qui si misura la necessità di un altro modello di società. Matura e si fa avanti un nuovo modo di intendere la politica e le relazioni, un'alternativa rappresentata dai movimenti sociali che in questo ultimo anno hanno riportato il Sud alla ribalta. Scanzano, Melfi, Rapolla, Acerra, Terrizzi, il movimento dei disoccupati. Quel movimento mondiale che dopo anni di fine della storia ha messo all'ordine del giorno un altro mondo possibile e ha modificato il senso comune, nel mezzogiorno si è connesso con il territorio ed è diventato comunità che si riprende un bene comune, la terra a Scanzano. È diventato comunità e classe operaia a Melfi, che dopo anni di sconfitte si riprende diritti che proprio la modernizzazione aveva sottratto. Qui dove negli anni si è concentrato il massimo della crisi si è messo in cammino l'alternativa. Il nostro partito ha investito molto sui movimenti. Rifondazione ne ha saputo cogliere la novità, la forza e ha contribuito, non credo di esagerare, in modo determinante alla loro costruzione. Di determinazione. Questa scelta seppur troppo dibattuta, siamo riconosciuti e qualità. Abbiamo imparato che dalla crisi della politica si esce solo facendola vivere nelle pieghe della società, riappropriandosi e rappresentando bisogni e desideri collettivi. Un'esperienza fra tutte, quella di Melfi, un'esperienza di lotta che viene da lontano, dalla sedimentazione di un cammino in fabbrica e fuori dalla fabbrica, compreso il cammino di Scanzano. In quei 21 giorni abbiamo visto operare una classe operaia che ha vinto anche perché ha saputo mettere a frutto tutte le esperienze vissute in questi anni. I lavoratori e le lavoratrici di Melfi, di fronte ai soprusi dei capi all'interno della fabbrica, hanno risposto assediandola. Di fronte all'isolamento hanno risposto costruendo un'ampia coalizione democratica, recuperando l'unità non attraverso sigle sindacali ma dal basso, alla repressione della polizia, alle che sono stati protagonisti del conflitto prima e durante i 21 giorni di lotta. Oltre 60 di questi lavoratori hanno votato la mozione 1. Non tutti sono iscritti al circolo aziendale e non per caso. Con il nostro lavoro ci siamo dati due obiettivi: rompere la frammentazione e portare la fabbrica nel territorio.
Primo intervento, la parola al compagno Francesco Marigiò, si prepari il compagno Marco Nesci.
Ma compagni e compagni, evidentemente con le notizie che ci sono giunti ieri la nostra attenzione non può che rivolgersi subito alla notizia positiva della liberazione della compagna e giornalista Giuliana Sgrena. Si inserisce in una situazione torbida, si può dire poco evidentemente, ma è altrettanto evidente che quella situazione è una situazione di anormalità. Viene rapita una giornalista di sinistra, pacifista, di una testata, quella del Manifesto, da sempre contro la guerra. E stranamente si rapisce una giornalista, e non è la prima volta, che si occupa di Fallujah, e cioè di quella città che è stato teatro, suo malgrado, di una tra le più feroci mattanze che l'esercito americano ha fatto negli ultimi decenni. Viene rilasciata in circostanze altrettanto strane. Questo quadro difficile credo che vada analizzato a lungo. Evidentemente a Giuliana va tutta la nostra solidarietà e l'augurio che torni presto alla sua famiglia, al suo giornale, al suo popolo, cioè a noi, al popolo contro la guerra e per la pace. Ma questo tema, compagni e compagni, credo che ci riporta all'attualità dei nostri giorni, e cioè che viviamo in un paese in guerra. Viviamo in un paese in guerra, sì, perché le nostre truppe partecipano all'occupazione del popolo iracheno al fianco di inglesi ed americani, quelli che si definiscono democratici ed esportatori di democrazia, ma che in realtà hanno invaso un paese sovrano, lo hanno depredato, bombardato, spogliato della sua sovranità ed umiliato con elezioni farsa. L'Italia è complice di questo orrore, non solo perché occupa l'Iraq per spartirsi il petrolio e rifocillare così i condotti dell'Eni, ma perché decide dell'invio di altri elicotteri come quelli Mangusta che raderanno al suolo, come già hanno fatto altre città, come già successo per Fallujah. Non solo, ma il governo italiano si fa promotore in Europa della tesi secondo cui l'aumento delle spese militari non deve essere conteggiato dal patto di stabilità. È la guerra quindi che si fa sistema e che governa ogni aspetto della vita politica. A pagare, ancora una volta, neanche a dirlo, sono i più deboli. È per questo che credo sia fondamentale e importante continuare a mobilitarsi contro la guerra, a partire dalla prossima manifestazione nazionale del 19 marzo, di cui in questa sala o non ho sentito parlare o ho sentito parlare poco, quando appunto ci sarà l'anniversario dell'inizio della guerra in Iraq. In ogni città europea e nel mondo ci saranno manifestazioni nelle piazze e nelle strade per creare una mobilitazione permanente e mondiale contro la guerra, per chiedere il ritiro immediato delle truppe e per solidarizzare con la lotta del popolo iracheno che resiste a una feroce occupazione militare. So bene, compagni e compagni, che su questo tema, quello della resistenza del popolo iracheno, siamo divisi, anche profondamente. Ma ho rilevato con dispiacere che nella lunga relazione del segretario non ci sia stato alcun passaggio che parlasse dei popoli che resistono alla furiosa e cieca lotta dell'imperialismo americano. Ma è davvero così difficile accogliere le osservazioni di Giorgio Bocca, non un noto comunista, ma Giorgio Bocca, e cioè dire che in Iraq i veri resistenti non sono quelli che vanno a votare, come dice Fassino, ma i veri resistenti sono quelli che resistono con i loro corpi alla guerra e all'occupazione militare. È davvero così difficile dirlo. Ed è davvero difficile dire che l'errore, anche a sinistra, è quello di solidarizzare solo, cito testualmente sempre Giorgio Bocca, con quelli che la pensano come noi, i ricchi della terra, che gira e rigira, la pensano sempre come con gli americani. È davvero difficile parlare di questo. E ancora, è davvero difficile per noi sostenere con forza la lotta del popolo palestinese che lotta per la libertà e la sovranità nazionale, o essere al fianco oggi di Cuba che resiste da decenni ad un embargo vergognoso. Credo che sia davvero un nostro compito morale stare al fianco di questi ed altri popoli e lottare insieme a loro contro le politiche di guerra, facendo ciascuno la propria parte. A noi la lotta quindi in questa parte di mondo finiamo di e torniamo a trovare un punto in comune. Non è stato fatto, si è andato avanti a maggioranza e così, sempre accolti di maggioranza, emendamento dopo emendamento, si è modificato lo statuto e lo si è approvato con una maggioranza del 59%. Credo proprio che non sia un bel segnale. Abbiamo un partito fragile, debole, rissoso, che ha bisogno di unità, altrimenti le tante realtà periferiche che rimangono nella rissosità non producono iniziativa politica. E poi hai voglia di dire che vogliamo incalzare a sinistra il governo Prodi se abbiamo un partito impantanato nelle beghe e nelle discussioni interne. Hai voglia a parlare di un rilancio del partito se poi siamo fermi in una rissosità. Questo partito ha resistito a tanti scossoni, incluse le scissioni, ma i segni di quegli scossoni sono profondi. Ho finito. Questo congresso aveva un'occasione preziosa, e cioè definire sì una linea politica, ma anche trovare un senso unitario e di lavoro e di mobilitazione. Non lo abbiamo fatto. Compagni e compagni, i mesi che abbiamo davanti sono ricchi e densi di appuntamento. Il 19 marzo, le elezioni regionali, le 1000 mobilitazioni locali, la conferenza di organizzazione, passando per alcune cose, come dire, anche di carattere internazionale. Credo che l'obiettivo sia quello di far crescere l'influenza del partito e la mobilitazione del partito. Questo lo possiamo fare, e ho finito davvero, mettendo a risultante tutte le nostre energie e tutta la nostra intelligenza. Il partito ha bisogno di questo passo in avanti per il suo radicamento, per la sua crescita e per raccogliere quella sfida alta che Gramsci chiamava la riforma morale e intellettuale del Paese.
Grazie Maringiò. Alla parola il compagno.
I now recognize Marco Nesci. Erminia Emprin has the floor.
Compagni e compagni, ho partecipato come...
I have attended.
Devo dire che la discussione, se fosse stata una discussione in cui tutti avessimo imparato ad ascoltarci, forse non ci sarebbero state le possibilità per banalizzare, per denigrare la posizione altrui. Vedete, io sono piuttosto sconcertato quando sento alcune cose, perché si possono non condividere le opinioni degli altri, però quando si arriva a dire che, come ad esempio è stato detto pochi minuti fa, che siamo di fronte alla...
When people say that we are faced with a rehabilitation of Sharon, or as some others have said, that we no longer recognize the values of our freedom fighters, of the Resistenza, it's not a matter of political reasons, or not only that, it's just violence against the intelligence of others.
È inaccettabile.
And it is unacceptable, because one can very well say, I disagree with the expression of nonviolence, but then to say that we have filed the values of the resistance, or that we don't recognize the struggle of the Palestinians or the freedom fighters among the Iraqis who are not suicide bombers, is a fact. But the whole approach to nonviolence is very specific. We perhaps forget that in Genoa in 2001, something occurred, and that event led to our political maturity. And I experienced what came before and what came after Genoa. And in Genoa, we were able to see that the violence of authorities cannot be countered in that way on equal terms, because there we can truly be defeated. Just think, what would have happened in Genoa had there been an equal response to what was done by the law enforcement and the international authorities who wanted all that to occur. So I think that we need to counter the dominion, the will of imposing dominion of the Americans, and that's the very heart of the proposal. It has nothing to do with the revisionism on resistance or the freedom fighters of Palestine. In our conferences, we spoke a lot about that only point in the proposal which could be of interest in our proposal, which is to say the part of the government, and it is a pity that we did not have an in-depth discussion on the analysis and contents which do not propose going to government as the end purpose. But I would have wanted an in-depth analysis on an alternative proposal, because the aim is an alternative and not government. This is an analysis, not an end point. Had we been able to discuss all this, I'm sure that we would have come out of this political pattern of sorts. It is hard to sustain our positions with the center-left. There are differences that cannot be overcome immediately, but those who believe...
Sedendosi su un tavolo e discutendo con le segreterie del centro-sinistra di questi problemi, ha sbagliato tutto, perché lì noi saremo sempre perdenti, saremo sempre minoranza. È fuori nel paese che possiamo vincere, perché...
And I think that it is only in the country, in the field, that we can win, because it is only there that our proposals can prevail. So much has been said about Article 18, the betrayal of the 11,000 votes, but that's silly. Well, the parties who told people that they shouldn't go to vote are wrong, because they should fight about the contents. And the challenge we want to meet, to be met, is to or by the center-left, is to allow the movements to count so that they can suggest a truly alternative policy. And just a few minutes to speak about the department I've been heading for the past 2 years. Democracy is coming under heavy attack in our country, and this aspect is a bit neglected in our party and in general in the country. I am speaking about the constitution of this country, the Constitutional Charter. How many people know outside this room that not only is the Constitution being reworded, but a new Constitution is being written? A new Constitution is being written because 50 articles of this Constitution are being changed. The second half of this Constitution is being changed. In a few days' time, it will be voted by the Senate. So it will go through a parliamentary scrutiny for the first time. And this new constitution provides a total dismantling of the democratic system in the country. It does away with the principles which are the foundation of our constitution and which our constituent fathers had envisaged as being three powers, the judicial, the executive. The judicial, as we all know, is coming under violent attack. And the proposed reforms in this area are quite advanced. In the legislative and executive areas, the whole system of the country is being changed. We will no longer have a parliamentary system, but rather have a presidential one where the head of the government will have the power to rescind the chambers when these are in disagreement with the decisions of the head of the state. So this is the situation. So as I said, there's this violent attack against the first part of the Constitution as well, because devolution and so many other things are undermining the first part of the Constitution as well. There is no longer a universality of rights. And I think it is on these matters that we should focus in our political battle to defend the Constitution. And I'm saying this with a touch of pride because I've worked on this myself. We are building and have built an excellent position for the oppositions, which not only defend the Constitution in a very clear-cut manner, but have laid the foundation for the establishment of the largest movement that has ever existed in the country. And you shouldn't be surprised by this, but the movement and the caucus for no to referendum and no to reforms of the Constitution, many organizations have joined, many trade unions, all of the opposition. These are trade unions and parties and groupings. And we have a tremendous potential. We're speaking about millions of people, and we have the possibility of getting the battle on rights to prevail. And as is happening in many committees, it could be placed at the very heart of a very radical and interesting position that we need to ponder. Thank you, Marco Nesci. Commodore Minia Imprinzi and then Nicola Nicolosi. I would like to invite you to be very careful with the time limit because we started late and have so many speakers this morning. So when you get to 8 minutes, I'll tell you it's time to close.
Compagne e compagni, che la pratica della
Dear comrades, the practice of questions and the aim of rebuilding the material conditions where the autonomy and subjects of the conflict can take shape and can be countered is essential to take a leap forward and go from a defensive position towards one of reforming what exists. And as the Secretary said, to counter a predator capitalism, and I would add a patriarchal capitalism, because capitalism, which on the one hand wants work without subjectiveness, and on the other hand similarly wants women who are no longer subjects, who are no longer players. And I believe that this policy line is the one that can express criticism. And this is the type of culture wherein I have lived and where I have met with the experience of Rifondazione Comunista criticism, which is a radical criticism of neoliberal globalization of war, and a criticism that the party has to develop further. And this because I believe that to rebuild the autonomy of the players is essential if one wishes the critical culture that we need to emerge, a new alternative culture, which is alternative to the culture of the right, on which to build social growth. Why am I speaking of a patriarchal capitalism? Because it's coming back today in a rosy fashion. It is the supremacy of the patriarchs as described in the Old Testament. They received their wisdom from God, and it is a supremacy which excludes women, which goes from the exclusion of the right to property, but is also a denial of self-representation as gender and as elements of change. So the other element that we should concentrate or focus on is to get rid of a prejudice that the patriarchal approach is more stressed in the traditional societies, and it is from the so-called developed and industrial countries that a battle for democracy can start, though it was based on the bombs of Afghanistan. Paradoxically, in advanced industrial societies, this problem arises. And we need to grasp the possibility of proposing a conflict, because the Declaration of Human Rights, attention for equality, its utopian strength, can increase the tension between what is not liberal and what could be, which is to say freedom. And faced with this tension, overcoming freedom and violence, the male privilege, which is summed up in a patriarchal society, is the same response that is given by neoliberalism through war. It becomes more aggressive. It has to defend itself. And therefore, we must press ahead to the bitter end. And I would like to speak about the referendum battle, which was unhoped for when we started operating as a party. And I would like to speak about the experience of this law as an exemplary law, as Mao would say, because prohibitionism, the prevention of autonomy for women to choose, and the suggestion of a model which is only one and validated by law that excludes all others, is today the element that we can seize upon, and fighting that, we can fight the right wing. And the choice of a law should be a choice and not a health regulation, for instance. We should not be called upon to conform to conformism in our attitude. There is women's self-determination, but this is not an attack against women. It is an attack against the ability of players to represent themselves, is an attack which sees parts of the center-left, part of the moderate left, give way and back away when countered by the right. A single text which prevented the access to in vitro fertilization of women who were not in a stable relationship and were heterosexual. And so with a referendum and a referendum battle, we can beat the ideology of the right wing and change the material everyday conditions of our daily lives. And this is something which imposes on everyone, just like war does, imposes on everyone a concept of the sacrality of life. This is something that even war takes upon itself. So we need to build a range of values that should not be defined by law or by the state, but should be left to individuals, to players themselves to define. We had a meeting yesterday on the European left, and I believe that Europe and the left can play a very important role. The Oviedo Convention, which is really being discussed today in Italy, is a strong point, is not a weak point, as being announced now in Italy in the current debate. It has denounced prohibitionism. It denies a selection of the embryos, but it doesn't interfere with individual choice, and doesn't go so far as to impose by law where law starts and what the sacrality of life is, the sacrality of the embryo, but not of the mother. And then there is another point, and I come to my conclusion, there is another point that we can use as a platform, and it is that in the Charter of Human Rights and in the European Constitution, where we have freedom and equality treated separately, if we don't have equality and if we don't have freedom, there is a world where we do not wish to live. So there is an ideological constraint imposed by the Catholic Church, and the right has also told us at the meeting in Parliament, and there is a proprietorial bond, and it is said that minors should have as a point of reference both parents, and by law the so-called shared entrusting of children was to be imposed by law, and therefore there was an attempt to freedom, an attempt to the independence of the magistrates of the courts should be seen from this standpoint. There is case law in this country that is against these laws, and therefore there's this will to control the courts and the magistrates, and therefore the judicial powers. In the conference, the organization conference, we shall be discussing matters pertaining to the party. But in this culture, which is not only a border culture of being in or out, but it is a culture of being in or out of oneself. It is a culture which recognizes that when you are part of a process where knowledge and power is not wielded by you, then within this process you have to start from yourself, build on your own conscience and awareness, and then relate with the outside world. And I shall also close with a reference to the experience we've had about non-violence, and I would like to conclude with the women in black in Palestine, who set for themselves the aim of creating areas of encounter between Palestinians and Israelis, which is really very different from meeting while wielding a gun, and is really conducive to peace and living together. And we have something to learn from that. we have already learned something, we have to learn more, and we need to learn how to build a party where being inside and outside oneself is a condition for a dialogue to rebuild our leadership. Thank you, Armenia Imprint.
Nicola Nicolosi, si prepari la compagna.
I give the floor to Nicola Nicolosi and after him Valentina Steri.
Non vedo il compagno Nicolosi. Se non c'è il compagno Nicolosi, ma c'è la compagna Valentina Steri, gli diamo volentieri la parola. Si prepari il compagno.
Comrade Stefano Vinti is the next after this speaker.
Scusa Valentina, se è in sala.
If Comrade Fabio Amato is present, please come to the podium. And the floor to Valentina. Dear comrades, as many speakers have stressed, this 6th Congress marks a turning point in the history of our party because there are very different positions competing. And very much is at stake for our party and for the whole Italian left. This Congress is taking place in a situation, in an international situation, which is very unstable with a major crisis. In June, there was talk that the government was in a state of confusion. Many were optimistic and thought that the crisis of the right-wing government would be reversible and that there might be early elections. Now, the right wing is less split, but the forces of the opposition have been unable to put forward a real government alternative for this country. The center-left, at the time of greatest difficulty for the right wing, has been unable to develop a strong initiative in the opposition. They've lost time discussing abstract political formulas, procedures, machinery that consolidate a bipolar, personalized pattern that we should oppose, and they lose sight of what was and is a key objective, a serious debate and dialogue about program. They only discuss names and candidates, and they have increased the gap between the real country and the political approach of squabbling politicians. In the meantime, wages, salaries and pensions are cut by inflation, and while imperialism is more and more aggressive, there is war everywhere, military occupations, hundreds of thousands of civilian victims pay the price for the contradictions of this modern of development, this capitalism with no limits in the use of force and violence. The point is that despite important experiences of social conflict that we have correctly supported and given value to Melfi, Scanzano and Fiom and the metal workers' struggles, but despite all this, the crisis has not yet precipitated for government. The party of Rifondazione Comunista should have put on the table the content for a real alternative perspective, a clear platform to react to the anti-social class policies of this government. On the contrary, we made a mistake. We did not make the best possible use of those millions of voters who supported us for the extension of Article 18 against unfair dismissals, and we have not worked not just to win the next general elections, but to influence the platform of the center-left. We have not been able to create a forum for dialogue and unity where all parties and trade unions and movements, associations may contribute to building a movement based on action, on doing, on a common platform of all alternative forces. And these forces should support certain key priorities, and after developing these priorities, we could have a dialogue with the center-left. But this is not what the Fondazione Comunista has done. The party decided to become part of the center-left alliance, now called Unione. They accepted primaries or the fact that the Fondazione Comunista will be part of the next government and have its own government representatives. This is a background to the way in which our members voted, and there is something very significant in this. 41% of our members expressed their deep disagreement from the policy supported by the majority of the party, and they also criticize and express their disagreement with the methodology adopted by the leadership of the party. The leadership of the party has proved, even in the discussion on the bylaws, that they are not willing to open up to a larger majority. They just manage the party on the basis of a winner-takes-all criterion, which is what we criticize in the general politics. And many comrades have stressed that the idea of a synthesis between different positions is just obsolete. So they have 59%. 59% is a majority. But it is not such a good outcome. It splits a party in two at a time when we have heavy responsibilities, when we would need to be more united. We would need a different kind of party. And we do hope that the 12,000 new members of Rifondazione Comunista are resources that can participate and give their contribution to the hard work of our party branches. So the party is divided, and the policy is exactly the opposite of the previous Congress, which argued that the CGIL could not be reformed, that there was no space for reformism, and that the disobedient, the group of so-called disobedient forces was our main reference. Well, this change of policy could not really be understood by our members or digested, and our comrades cannot accept that unfair criticism of the history of the working class and communist movement and the forefathers of communism are being considered dead and not just in their bodies. Many of our members, many of our militants really have not understood and have not shared the theory of non-violence as a pillar in the identity of Rifondazione Comunista. If we are still internationalists, we should strongly support, without any ambiguity, all those people who are forced to resist military occupation and imperialist wars with armed weapons. We are not violent. We do condemn terrorism and the civilian victims of terrorism, but armed resistance against an invader is not terrorism, and the responsibility for violence all over the planet is due to the war terrorism of Bush and Sharon, and Bush and Sharon will never be accepted as partners for peace. The pre-Congress and Congress process has been undemocratic, and it has weakened the pluralism and democracy of our party. In our party branches, among our militants, this has developed a sense of uneasiness. Our party is not healthy now, and that is why we want this Congress to be different, to be united. We did not want to count supporters for this or that grouping, and it will be very difficult to manage this new stage between now and the next general elections. We still have time to correct our mistakes and to clarify to our our other forces that certainly we want to reach a government agreement, but there is a long way to go, and all depends on the content and programs, because communists give more importance to platforms and programs than taking sides. Certainly we have the objective to defeat the right wing, which is now in government, and it would be lethal for the Fondazione Comunista not to respond to the demand of the masses to defeat the right wing. But our key task, the key task of communists, is to build a real alternative, an alternative program that is shared by other forces of the opposition. And our party should clarify the necessary preconditions for a possible membership of a coalition government. That is why we need clear principles, not because we want negotiations in some secluded room, but because in order to participate in a government without being defeated by this experience, there must be some minimum preconditions developed with civic movements or social and political forces that intend to share this experience with us. One principle that I think is a principle that cannot be negotiated or given up is all-out rejection of war. The anti-war movement demands the end of occupation in Iraq, the withdrawal of military troops out and with Italian troops. It demands that the United States should stop threatening Venezuela, Cuba. Iraq supports the right of the Palestinians to their own state and supports the right of Iraqi people to resist against military occupation. And that is why on March 19th, 2 years after the imperialist aggression to Iraq, the movement appeals to an extraordinary world demonstration against the war. And finally, there is a crucial point is the defense of labor rights. If there is a wage problem in Italy, we ask all the forces of the center-left to include in the future platform of the coalition a law for automatic indexation. This party has many faults, but it still is a very valuable resource for all of us, where a forum where communists can feel at home. And this home should remain, we should defend on the basis of its foundations with open windows looking towards the world.
Io invito tutti I compagni.
I ask all comrades, please to respect the allotted time. We started late, and that is understandable because we ended very late last night in discussing the bylaws, but we have about 27 speakers this morning. So when you spoke for 7 minutes, I will ask you, I will warn you.
Perché abbiamo invertito prima, va bene.
Compagne e compagni.
Dear comrades, I think I support what our Secretary has demanded, a major social reform of the country. This implies the need to accept the challenge of change. We must accept this challenge. It is not an intellectual or politicized interpretation or hyper-political interpretation of this stage. It expresses and interprets social developments which have included which have included a lot of social action. In my region too, in Umbria, where we have debated the role of Europe and of a global perspective, a new labor movement is developing, and it has begun to take a leading role in hard social conflict against the counter-reform of Europe about tobacco, destroying quality agriculture. That is one example of our struggle, and we've had other extraordinary struggles in Umbria to defend quality products. Multinational corporations have force their model or try to force their model upon others. In Perugia, the disappearance of the chemical industry, and overnight the production plants of multinational corporations are closed down, even though they have profits, and they are transferred elsewhere. Nestlé is outsourcing part of its production, and Perugina has just become a manufacturing plant instead of becoming the factory that produced the best chocolate in Europe. They are transferring the core business of Perugina, and Nestlé at the same time is forcing the workers to work on Sunday, working more and earning less. While this happened in Perugia, in Terni, ThyssenKrupp waged a fierce attack trying to wipe out the most important steel mills in Italy, wiping out its part of its production, whereas having different products was very important. And we have seen major mobilization of the workers, and we've seen the whole community at Terni defending the factory and its identity, a major role for democratic institutions safeguarding industry in our region. But at the end of the day, we should be very clear in what we say. That multinational corporation has won. They have closed down the production of magnetic steel. They have transferred it to Germany and France. We have safeguarded and protected our jobs for 5 years, maybe, until somebody comes up to tell us that the international competitiveness of Chinese steel is too high, and therefore we have to downsize Italian plants and the Terni plant. So we have all these experiences in the chemical industry, in the tobacco farming, in the steel industry, and all these directly concern the role of national governments and of Europe. And they tell us that the party of the European left is essential to safeguard the European social model and also to help this continent have its own industrial policy, its own identity, its own profile, and its own products. So the multinational policy, as a movement of movements has shown us, must be based on policies which can oppose the positions of the multinational corporations and their pillage of our communities. The party of the European left and national governments have the need to develop an alternative to globalization. The party should have its own idea about a system of local development, intertwining a different form of development, a different quality of development, production and safeguard of labor rights and the rights of the workers. Thus, not just talking about these matters, but actively opposing an industrial decline that concerns not just factories, but whole communities. It fragments production, it dequalifies production, and even the quality of work and of labor deteriorates. So we need a major social reform which is focused on labor and on the protection of national industry as some of our key priorities. Many changes have occurred in the world of labor now. Our secretary has talked about them. We have to be active at local level in our communities too. We have locally in our region, we have tried to develop labor policies. But these policies are at the same time trying to stabilize casual employment and give greater job stability and security. We are aiming for more permanent contracts, and we have started the experiment of a basic income, of a citizenship income. And then we are advocating industrial policies and local development for the development of our communities. This is a necessary effort for our country to stand up to European standards. This is a major challenge, and the Fondazione and our movement and the alternative left must advocate an alternative vision of development. This is one of the major challenges we're faced with. We can make a difference on these issues, and we should advance and advocate an alternative vision of economic development. I'm a communist from Umbria, and I really felt touched when Pietro Ingrao decided to join Rifondazione Comunista for 30 years. He was a member of parliament elected in our constituency, and he has shown the ability to understand change. And Pietro Ingrao, as well as Aldo Capitini, have shown that non-violence is a major instrument for revolutionary change, to change the world and to give a different notion of the possibility of revolution. And this, with such a major challenge, no polemics make sense. I see that there are many people who are interested in our party and in our policies. Many intellectuals, many workers, many young people consider Rifondazione Comunista as a new hope, as a new opportunity, as a new challenge. And I think this Congress should respond to the challenge, because today change is possible. It is possible to change and to develop a new country and a new perspective for new generations. Thank you. Thank you, Stefano Vinti. I give the floor to Comrade Nicola Nicolosi, and after him, Salvatore Di Stefano. I must make an announcement at 3 o'clock. The political committee will meet. 11 o'clock in the same room. There is a meeting of the comrades of supporting the majority motion of the political committee. 2 tickets from Venice to Bari for tomorrow were found. If you've lost them, you can contact the organizers.
Comrades, for the past 4 years, our country has undergone an economic crisis, and macroeconomic figures tell us that there is a decline in production, consumption, and tourism, the latter being a very worrying sign. Family incomes are worsening, family savings are reduced, and public state accounts are not in order. And the employment figures have halted in spite of the calculations on jobs being based on jobs that can last only 1 week. The constant industrial decline is also another sign. I mentioned tourism earlier as being very worrying in its decline. And the arrival of tourists has been cut by 1,300,000 units, and this can lead to very serious problems. The country is in need. We need a recovery of our economy, and this requires structural change. And what strikes us in this crisis is that it is impossible to have an economic and industrial recovery in the country unless there is public intervention. Public intervention which calls for a return of politics to the forefront, and the economy could and should be focused upon by political authorities. Previously, other speakers have touched upon these matters, but we are faced with a situation which is one of industrial decline, because in the past politicians made the wrong choices. In the past few years, politicians have focused on dwarf-sized companies. Companies are too small. They cannot be competitive. After the devaluation of the lira, they just lost any ability to become creative, and that's our major problem today. There was no response from political authorities. Our major companies have closed down, and our country is becoming more and more an enormous market where products from abroad are being sold. And there is really no industrial policy, and therefore our country will have great difficulty in recovering. I won't describe the situation that has evolved over these years, but we're no longer present in the field of telecommunication. In high technology sectors we are absent, and the same applies to the chemical sector, let alone steelworks, where we've had problems in the past month. And then there was another sector which was very important. The textile sector has come under a crisis, not to speak of the automobile industry. So we have this major crisis of large companies, but if to that we add the moral issue in our country, the case of Parmalat, the budgetary irregularities, the whole imbroglio on savings, or the Volare case, or Impregilo, the construction company. We have so many cases, and our system has adopted operations to defend itself that have become unacceptable. And this leads to a difference inequality in our country. And there is a basic problem, because the democratic system as a whole is undermined. Furthermore, this whole process leads to an increase in poverty levels, and in many areas workers fall within the poorer segments of society, and young people and women are in this poverty area, and the gap is no longer tolerable. So the problem is, how can we react to this scenario? The scenario that we need is a clear picture of the situation. In the past, with some responsibility on the part of the trade unions, and the agreement of the 23rd of July, Ninkum's policy was implemented, and the CGIL leadership has questioned this, but there were concrete findings, because this agreement led to a scenario that I shall try to describe. It certainly led to an impoverishing of workers and women and pensioners in Italy. there are findings which are significant. These policies have led to a different process in the redistribution of wealth in Italy, a redistribution of wealth that has transferred sizable amounts of money from wages to profit. The GDP that went to salaried workers in 1972 was 50.6%. Now we have reached 40% of wealth being destined to salaried worker income. So 10% has moved over to profit. And we can no longer postpone the wage issue. We need to act in this area, in the trade unions and in various areas of politics, because these should be the central issues. And in the international field, where there has been redistribution of wealth, we see that countries such as France, Germany, and Spain itself, and I wouldn't even exclude the United Kingdom, because there was never such a clear-cut reduction of wealth being transferred to wages, from wages to profit. And France had a 50% level for the redistribution of this wealth, and now it is ranging around 52%. Germany has gone from 54 to 53. Spain has remained at 50, and the United Kingdom, which in the mid-70s transferred 58%, is now redistributing 55%. So our country was the one that cut wages and cut the redistribution of income to dependent workers or salaried workers. So there seems to be a clear will on how to redetermine the balance among citizens in Italy. And now I come to my conclusions. What are we supposed to do when confronted with such a situation? Well, we need to examine the salary issue, reaffirm the issue of rights, and a struggle against casual or precarious labor. This point, of course, was addressed at the very start of our Secretary's report, the drama of casual labor. This should become the central issue, and we should reaffirm a new season of trade union struggles to bring these 2 points to the very heart of the action of the trade unions, of the parties, and therefore of politics. And I shall conclude with a point which I believe is self-explanatory. What do the comrades of the party who are committed in large trade unions do? Well, it seems hard in our Congress. There seems to be a collective allergy. It seems almost difficult to quote the CGIL, because when we mention the name, I understand that there can be some irritation or tension, but a party like ours, whose members, 90% of which are card-carrying members and also members of CGIL, are not indifferent to our action. And since we have thousands of comrades who are involved in CGIL and in the unions, we are duty-bound to discuss the relationship between the party and the trade union movement, or movements, plural. And over the years, efforts were made on the part of the party to make the CGIL change its position. They seem to be reluctant to change their action as unions, but now we seem to be able to put our problem to them, and they can take them on board. And though we are a minority in the organization, we need to stress our points with the strength that we have. We are a right, because the trade union should not become reformist. We must really drag it away from these reformist fronts and bring them back to the masses, to the workers. And a mass party cannot be built unless we have a direct relationship with the most important organizations and the large trade union organizations such as CGIL. And therefore I reiterate our commitment to reaffirm these points at the next CGIL Congress. I call on Salvatore Di Stefano. The next comrade to speak will be Giorgio Cremas.
Compagne e compagni, le drammatiche fasi.
Dear comrades, the dramatic ups and downs in the release for Giuliana Schena, the joy we feel for the fact that she's free again but wounded, and the sorrow for the person who was killed, remind us of the violence of a war wanted by the U.S. of America for their imperialist war, a war which is destroying Iraq, causing death and destruction. But the United States are not able to win their dirty war and dominate, tame the Iraqi people, despite the fact that they have nearly 200,000 troops. They have forgotten the lesson of Vietnam, and they forget that wherever you have occupation, you have rebellion, and where there is oppression, there is resistance. And this shows that if neoconservative American circles, on the basis of the theory of preemptive war and of aggression against peoples, if these were to start military action against Syria, Iran, or other countries, they would just end up in a quagmire of conflict with no solution and threaten dangers for the world. We must continue demanding the immediate withdrawal of troops from Iraq. We must express an all-out rejection of war, and we must work hard for the success of the demonstration on March 19th. At the same time, our party is involved in the struggle to oust the Berlusconi government, which is the most dangerous one, the most dangerous government ever that Italy has ever had since the birth of the Republic. This need is even more relevant to the south of Italy, where social disruption and aggression against disadvantaged groups is worse and worse, and the gap between south and north is larger and larger. Greater poverty, lower consumption, higher unemployment. And particularly young people are jobless. Hundreds of thousands migrate from southern Italy every year. So and there is a system of power based on mafia and camorra with its terrible criminal power. And we must fight hard against it. It is a deep crisis that has a direct impact on the whole of the economy, in industry, in agriculture, in the tertiary sector, in every sector of the economy. There's a setback, and this causes social disruption, and we must stop it through a policy of development, progress, and democratic rebirth. We must claim and demand that the state plays a major role with a massive policy of government investment. The mistakes of the past should not be repeated, but there should be struggle against mass unemployment, and there should be industrial policies, policies for research, infrastructures, innovation, credit, education, and cultural innovation. Against this background, we must be deeply critical of a Maastricht Europe, and Prodi played a major role in the Maastricht Europe, and Europe created a Maastricht through the Stability Pact penalizes the most disadvantaged area. Southern Italy is one of the priorities, and other priorities are employment, education, healthcare, information. All these priorities clarify that the government of the country, a new government is needed for the country. Can the center-left provide this government and defend democratic freedom, the Republican Constitution? Can it change the situation? We must avoid any sterile disagreement or a sterile debate. In the past we used to talk about two right wings, as though the center-right and the center-left were the same. And then we started welcoming changes on the center-left, ignoring the positions of people like D'Alema or Fassino. We cannot be an extremist or anarchy-like, but at the same time we must demand a strong platform of demands, because the majority of the Unione is subordinate to the dominant culture. It is a difficulty. Our task is very hard, and this is manifest to all, because we have radical positions, but DS and Margherita are mainstream and moderate. They want to oust Berlusconi, but they want to continue with Berlusconi-type policies. They just want to alternate in power, but we want an alternative. And many other forces want it, democratic movements and the social movements, and movements that fight against neoliberalism and want to move beyond capitalism. So we must develop an alternative, but this doesn't just mean advocating a policy of reform or reform demands. It means that we have the objective of socialism, and we identify alliances and experiences in this direction. So there is the vision according to which there is a similarity between this and the first center-left is questionable. At the time, the center-left was created after the Tambroni government and the movement that stopped this neo-fascist alliance, but I don't agree with this parallel. At the time, it was a different time. Both the Italian and international arena were different. At the time, it was the beginning of peaceful coexistence between Khrushchev and Kennedy, or there was a change in the church with Pope John, whereas now the church is anti-science and anti-feminist. And on this, of course, we need dialogue with believers, with Christians. We need a dialogue between Marxism and Christianity. That is fine, but why should we accept transcendence and deny materialism, which is the foundation of Marxism? We should advocate the liberation of human beings, but it should not be advocated only as pure utopia and hope. Dear comrades, we must not be afraid of what is new. We have been told this very often, but we must maintain and defend the basic fundamental values of our party and our communism. These values have been expressed in Italy through resistance and anti-fascism. These are founding values of our constitution, of our republic, of our democracy. And these values are particularly topical today because of the 60th anniversary of liberation from Nazism and fascism, as we did yesterday in this room with the presence of Giovanni Pesce, a partisan, a leader of the partisans. And I want to repeat, now and always, resistance.
Grazie al compagno di
I thank Comrade Di Stefano. I give a floor to Comrade Giorgio Cremaschi. After him, Francesco Ricci.
compagno Cremaschi era in sala.
Compagno Comrade Cremaschi was here. Is he coming?
Compagni.
Dear comrades, in these very minutes, I believe Giuliana Sgrena is landing in the airport. So I just wish to say that maybe on this we can be less tense. We can accompany the joy. We feel the joy for her return with the sorrow for the death of this heroic representative of the institutions who has sacrificed his life. But after the joy, after the pain and sorrow, let me express all my rage. I was reading the newspapers this morning, and I feel people who write and ask the left and the peace movement, do not split this country. Well, the horror of this war is beginning to hit some consciences that were reluctant too. But it is also a sign of the fact that they are not yet aware that it is not the peace movement that is splitting the country. It is this infamous, outrageous war that has produced 150,000, that has caused 150,000 deaths. And I have two things to say, dear comrades. First, I read the empty and rather cowardly words of our Prime Minister, who said a tragic fate. No, it is not fate, it is war with daily murders, the daily murders of war. And our institutions should react to war. I hope that in Italy our magistrates incriminate for murder the Marines who have shot, and I hope the government asks to extradite them. I know that the United States do not accept any law of international, any respect for international law, but we should demand it, and we should march again to ask for the withdrawal of Italian troops from Iraq, here and now. This must be our key priority, and I want to say very clearly, comrades, if, unfortunately, if we were not to succeed, if in 1 year when general elections come, if at that time Italian troops are still in Iraq, the immediate withdrawal, with no buts, with no ifs, well, in that case, the withdrawal of Italian troops from Iraq must be priority, number one for the center-left government. And for me, this is the only precondition I place for joining that front. Comrade Fausto Bertinotti made a very beautiful report, and I agree with him. And it was focused on the casualization of work and the precarious condition of the workers and of their lives, and that is the other phase of war and competitiveness. There are two wars in the world. There's the violent war of the United States, and there's a war of competition and competitiveness, which concerns all the workers and factories. Electrolux announced that they are going to close down 50% of their production plants in Europe. Many of them are in Italy. And then they launched a sort of auction on working conditions. They said that they will only keep the plants where the workers and the unions accept the worst forms of exploitation. That is what the war of competition is all about. Against this war, we need a major solidarity among the workers. We need the unity of the workers. We need social conflict. We need democracy. And let me say something very, very clearly, because I've heard some interpretations that I don't agree with, and I'm sure that Fausto will say the same. Some have said that this Congress advocates the idea of a new social covenant among the forces of production, employers and workers. I don't think this is our approach. We are demanding a change, a radical change, and turning point in economic and social policies, and this requires that we struggle to defend the wages and working conditions of the workers, not just because this is right, because the strategy of competitiveness based on cutting labor costs is bankrupt. This is a bankruptcy, the failure of 20 years of attack against labor costs, and yet they're still advancing this policy. Montezemolo's Confindustria, the Employers Association, is still advancing this platform. So this is why I say to the unions, the struggles, the actions of these years are fine, are very good, but I have experienced them directly in the Metal Workers Union, and Fausto has been so generous to us metal workers, but there is one basic element which is common to all these actions, in Melfi, interni. If we were to accept the state of affairs resulting from social dialogue, from tripartite consultation, from what is feasible, we would have got nothing. So you start by not accepting the present state of affairs, and then you proceed using the practice of democracy. Democracy is something small, but it means that you spend your time with the workers, you have mass meetings with the workers, you're in the front line with them. Don't listen to those who tell you you're an extremist. But the compromise that is to be reached has to be reached with the agreement of the workers. And the workers must vote by secret ballot, go to a referendum and say whatever agreement has been signed is fine, is accepted by the workers or not. This is a simple way, but it rejects the policy of tripartite consultation with no trade union democracy. We all hope that the center-left wins. To oust Berlusconi, to defeat Berlusconi, is a priority for all our movement. It is a step forward. And this alliance with the alliance with the center-left is the inevitable result of this inevitable priority that our people want. But because of this, we must be very cautious and wary of any attempt to get back to the past. We all remember the ideology of the friendly government at the time of the Prodi government. The trade unions, the labor movement must be independent from the government and take action when needed. This is the essential guarantee and precondition that we should have. And as far as we are concerned, we must be intransigent as concerns economic and industrial policy. There is a policy and strategy which has failed. We must go back to the notion of government intervention, of planning, public measures, because otherwise Italy will be pillaged by the multinational corporations, and the experience with the ThyssenKrupp multinational is a clear sign of this. There is an excessive power of the multinational corporation, whereas political power is weak with the multinationals and strong against the workers. Let me use the language of the 60s too. no more policies which are strong against the weak and weak against the strong. It's the opposite that should be done, and we should develop instruments, tools, laws and actions. Many actions are to be repealed. The unfair laws of the Berlusconi government must be repealed. But at the same time we need new legislation starting against precariousness and casualization of work, and some unfair measures in the Treo Act of the center-left are to be repealed as well. And I think there's a major challenge to reconstruct a government alliance for a party like ours is inevitable. But there is one point that I'd like to dwell upon. It is true, this is a difficult path, this is a difficult process. I said that trade unions must be independent. Well, I believe that if we are really convinced that at present we need to build a party which struggles and is in government and struggles within the government too, I may say, well, in this case, the party too must be independent and autonomous. I would not be scandalized if in the future we have a political party which may be part of a government majority, may be part of a government, but may struggle against the mistaken decisions of that government and may take to the streets against those mistaken decisions. If necessary, that would be a real breaking point, breaking away from the communist tradition. This is a real difference from the communist tradition. We should be very clear about this. Communists are very good at being opponents in the opposition, but when they are in government, and dear comrade Ferrando, not just when they are part of a government coalition, when they are in government alone too, they change and they disappoint the expectations. And this is our history, and our new history must be different. I have never hidden my doubts about some choices that Fausto made, but I do warmly share the need for a cultural renewal. And I might use different words from the words used by Nicky, but let me make a simple comparison. In the 20th century, for a long time in our history, when a worker wanted to increase his wages, he would threaten the boss or the employer, saying, either you give me higher wages or I will do like Russia. Nowadays, a great country in the world governed by the Communist Party, it frightens the workers. It is the employers who tell the workers, either we cut wages or I will do like China. And this tells us that we must change, not to become something else, but to remain communists. The only way we have to become communists is to deeply innovate our culture, because we need to find out what the change is all about. And because of this, in innovating and changing our culture, let me say, this includes something that unfortunately I've had to learn in so many years. In this, we must make an effort towards mutual understanding, to understand one another, to understand each other. We had the joy of Comrade Piedingrau joining our party. I was just a child at the time, but I know that in the 11th Congress of the Communist Party, Comrade Pietro-Ingrao was defeated. He was in the minority, but he claimed and demanded the right to feel doubt and to hold a doubt. If the Communist Party then had accepted this choice, we would be more advanced. But now we're making a basic choice. I feel I need to say something. This party has a majority. Majorities are needed. That is what democracy is all about. But in innovating communist tradition, if there is a majority in the majority is not the party. We are all the party. Having said this, having quoted Ingrao, let me also end by quoting Comrade Amendola. Now back to work and back to our struggle. Thank you.
Grazie al compagno.
We thank Comrade Cremaschi, and I now give the floor to Comrade Francesco Ricci, and after him, Comrade Danilo Corradi.
Cari compagni, care compagne, la conclusione dei congressi.
Comrades, there's one thing from our congresses that emerges. 40% of the participants and half of the militants do not share the government choices, but if the choices of the government meet with so great a dissent, then all of the bourgeois press applauds this movement towards a prohibis on the part of our party. The first motion has an undeniable support, and the 40% cannot change reality. Every new day there is a class contradiction between the communists and the center-left. Privatization, so many matters, and when Fascine rehabilitated Craxi in his attack to the wage indexation, what can we say? People want to get rid of Berlusconi, but is it is the bourgeoisie now wanting someone that they can better control? The enlightened bourgeoisie, which awaits the conclusions of our Congress, is of a different opinion. Certainly they want us on board, but it seems that they don't want us at the helm, but just as someone who will have a minor role. They say that we are about to reach government with the liberals, but to create obstacles for the ruling classes. If this is the proposal, well, it's acceptable, but is it credible? The Secretary and the Ministers of Rifondazione will be in a minor precisely Clemente, Mastella, Rutelli, D'Alema, Fascina, who are inspired by the texts of Giuliano Amato. And we are going to enter that government to create obstacles, to put a spanner in the wheels of the ruling classes. I don't think that's possible. And if even this litany of ousting Berlusconi that has been mentioned throughout the Congress seems more and more credible, ousting Berlusconi is of course our goal, but the entry into the GAD has made this aim come closer, or has it removed it further away? After the social bloc that is still there, we feel that this government will stay on until 2006, because the liberals of the Ulivo don't want to oust Berlusconi with struggles, but they just want to have an alternation. And lacking a communist opposition, there will just be more serious and victories on the part of the right wing. And it's not, as the comrade said, let's give it a try and see how all this ends, because this attempt has cost so much to us. The fact that we cannot build the ousting of Berlusconi on the basis of our struggles, and the cost will be even dearer in future, and we will have to support policies that will bear the mark of the opposing classes. Let us just think about the war, for instance. Now a major result is considered the vote about the funding of the mission in Iraq. But what are the future allies in government doing and saying when they vote against the wars of Berlusconi? They still speak in favor of their humanitarian wars in the past, including the bombing of Belgrade, and they refuse Berlusconi's unilateralism, but they want a place of Europe in the colonial division side by side with Bush, and they refuse to call for the withdrawal of troops, and they vote in favor of all colonial invasions from Bosnia to Afghanistan, and they do this because their philosophy is summed up as follows, and I quote: "Peace and freedom are not given once and for all. It may be necessary to defend them in other countries soldiers with weapons. And you know who wrote this? It was Romano Prodi. And what will the ministers of Rifondazione do? And I'm asking this of Comrade Kremasky, who has just spoken, when Prodi will send troops to defend some oil well in the name of what he calls peace and liberty. What will the comrades in Rifondazione do? And do we have to continue with the examples? The protagonists of the future government that has already received the support of Montezemolo and bankers have been sitting here in the front row. Now, I wouldn't want to be a Lambrosian, but I would like to say, well, let's look at their faces. What do they have to do with the new world we want to build? Whatever do they have to do with that? And the percentages, Congress percentages, don't have the power to change facts. And the months to come will confirm the motion I supported with other comrades, the one number 3. The proof of the pudding that has been suggested so many times has every time shown that the pudding of the class struggle is poisoned. And an elementary truth has been confirmed. The interests of capitalism and those of the workers do not tally. And this is why the communists cannot have government in capitalism, not because Karl Marx wrote this in one of his books, but because it was based on facts. And he criticized dozens of attempts that had failed. And even in the past century, all his positions were confirmed one after the other. No government at any time in any government has been able to reconcile the interests of the exploited and the exploiters. And this is why the road towards a socialist alternative does not provide for neoliberal stages, because the true alternative is not only a taking over the palace, though I believe that this is an indispensable step. It requires the participation in awareness of thousands of workers who do not delude themselves about reformist governments. This is why we don't need to be just faithful to dogmas, but if we renounce all this, we cannot build a government for the workers, of the workers. We're communists because we believe that capitalism cannot be reformed. It cannot be governed better. And we need to build strong relations to overcome it. Socialism and barbarism, it's not just a juxtaposition. There's so many different chords to our party. In the 4th and 5th document, which are defined Trotskyites, do not find themselves in this definition, but I find myself very well. I'm a Trotskyite, not because I'm nostalgic, but because I like myths. And I have no Gandhi posters in my rooms, and I don't think that communism and Gandhiism go side by side. And Gandhi himself never believed this. He felt that the rich were to be convinced to give something to the poor, and he did not support the idea of a Bolshevik who wanted to expropriate. The two positions cannot be reconciled. The revolutionaries of yesterday, I don't think, are politically dead. Among the great revolutionaries, I would like to remember one. And I would like to say right away that it is not that he is not a philosopher in nonviolence, owing to his interest in military matters and because of his study of civil war and insurrection, which was essential to expropriate the expropriators. He was considered the general. And like Comrade Bentinotti, he thought that the word revolution is important. Though, and I'm speaking of Engels, defined it thus: revolution, and I quote, is the act whereby part of the population imposes its will on the other part by means of guns, bayonets, and cannons. And I believe that the Secretary doesn't endorse this. A century and a half ago, Engels had to deal with those who wanted to govern, to shift leftwards the liberal government jointly with the movements. So you see, there's nothing novel about this approach. Engels felt that this was the attempt of Louis Blanc in France, and while Marx defined this as wishful thinking, Engels explained French socialists accepted some positions in the government. A minority, they accepted the responsibility of all the terrible things voted by the majority. And while all that was happening, the working classes were paralyzed by the presence in government of these ministers who expected to represent it. So as you see, there's nothing especially new about this. So those comrades who had a critical motion, who say that we are sectarian and say that we cannot go to government under capitalism, those comrades who said that with some what-ifs and yes-buts, the government position is acceptable, to these comrades I would like to say, well, you're right. We just cannot understand the virtues of a bourgeois government. But in our sectarianism, we are in excellent company. We doggedly believe that the true purpose of communism is to, through the structures of young people, of workers, put an end to the barbarism of capitalism, turning the workers into a leading class. And this may seem impossible to skeptics, to those who believe that realism is in government. Only with a revolutionary approach can we refound communism. Thank you.
Grazie al compagno Ricci. Alla parola il compagno.
Thank Comrade Ricci, and I call on Danilo Corradi and ask Franco Giordano to take the floor.
Compagni e le compagne della maggioranza della Commissione politica.
The comrades from the political majority are convened in the basement, in the Fascinetti room. Comrade Corradi has the floor.
Compagni e compagne, io...
Dear comrades, like Giorgio Cremaschi, my starting point is the dramatic and disconcerting news we have received from Iraq. In the coming days, we must make an effort to fully understand what has happened. And yet again, we'll have to demand truth and justice, as so many times in this movement against war and neoliberalism. We'll have to seek the truth, just like Juliana, who was trying to reconstruct what the truth is all about in that true slaughterhouse that she wanted to find out about in Fallujah. We are told that now is a moment of calm, of rethinking. I don't think so. I think in this Congress we should say those who need to rethink their views are the governments that occupy a country and destroy a population that resists. This is not a day just for thinking. This is a day for mobilizing, demanding an immediate withdrawal of troops. And together with Pier Solari we can say, we can ask, what are you doing? You are destroying a country. And I think we can do this starting with March 19th. Yet again, the European and World Social Forum demand a major mobilization. An international mobilization like February 15 with 100 demonstrations in the United States of America and London, which are the capitals of the two countries that are the main occupiers of Iraq. And we should do the same in Rome, asking our government to withdraw its troops and to withdraw politically. On March 19th, the movement can take to the streets again and walk the streets. I believe that when it comes to our Congress debate, I believe that this movement needs to take to the streets again. It needs to march in the streets, and I believe that March 19th can truly be our united decision all together in this Congress for the Rome demonstration to be a big demonstration, take to the streets again. Bertinotti stressed in his report that this Congress does take on board once and for all that movements, social movements, are the axis, the pillar for Rifondazione Comunista. I have a different view about the policy of this party in this last year. I think that the party has found it difficult to continue considering social movements as the key actors, protagonists of social change. I think that we have taken a step backward. We've had a difficulty. I'll try and explain this. After the referendum on Article 18 against unfair dismissals, we were unable to give value to that result. We did not prevail in the referendum, but 11 million people voted against casualization and neoliberalism, almost a higher amount of votes than all the votes of the center-left together. Instead of giving value to this, instead of considering those votes part of the assets of the alternative left with social movements, we decided to join the Democratic Alliance, the center-left alliance. We have made choices which are the opposite of the movement of movements. Let me quote an example of something which is different from what we were able to do on February 15th on the war. There was a huge mobilizing in February 15th and March 20th. Through social forums, this movement had managed to mobilize around a united and radical platform, no to war without ifs and buts, and immediate withdrawal of the troops. And we had managed to force the forces of the center-left that did not agree to take to the streets with us. And we did this because we defined the unity not within the center-left alliance, not through a relationship among political parties, but through building a political movement and through mass mobilizing. And there was a beautiful drawing by Vauro with this big demonstration, and Prodi and Fassino following the demonstration with two placards, one saying if and one saying but. But last autumn we didn't succeed. On October 30th, a demonstration against the war. On November 6th, a demonstration against casualization of labor, convened by some parts of the movement, had difficulties because our party supported the demonstration of the center-left coalition, which were not even held. And that demonstration would just serve the purpose of Prodi coming back to Italy, not really mobilizing against the two pillars of neoliberal globalization, war and casualization. Again, this would mean delegating the role of political opposition to political parties. And may I add something? Nuzio Derme was excluded from European elections, and in the debate he was seen as an alternative to Nicky Vendola, but there were technical solutions where this could have been solved, and this created problems for the political relations of young communists within the movement. Last summer, Berlusconi seemed to have been defeated, but we were not able to develop a big action last autumn to merge the big movement against the war with the social struggles, with the new stage of the movement of movements, with the only objective that could hold together all these movements, namely down with Berlusconi. And we didn't do this because the center-left alliance is not even in agreement about the fact that Berlusconi should go right now, maybe because they're doing some dirty work that can solve some problems for them as well. I agree, Comment Fausto, there is a new generation, political and social movements, the heart of the new movement that we developed in the days of Genoa, a rebellious generation challenging neoliberal globalization, which rejected WTO and the G8 as illegitimate bodies. This generation will not accept compromise about war and self-determination of peoples. This generation does not accept the European Constitution signed by Romano Prodi. This generation struggles against the outrage of the Schengen Agreement and Maastricht Europe. This is a new generation struggling against capitalism in our time. This generation has joined this party, has changed this party, or rather tried to change this party. Young communists have been protagonists in this experience. Let me get back to the theory of doubt that Giorgio was advocating. I have a doubt. This generation and these movements, the priority of these movements is not to be taken for granted just because we repeat it. How can we continue in a dialogue with this new generation, with my generation, if we are part of a government alliance with those who certainly did not object to Schengen, but established temporary detention centers, lagers for migrants in this country? This new generation will find it difficult to join this party if the party makes a government alliance with those who introduced casualization through the Treo Act, with manpower agencies, with temporary contracts, and all the other things that we experience directly. In this movement, the more moderate part of the social forum will be difficult to be found if in the municipal councils such as Naples they privatize water, or as a region of Campania build incinerators in Acerra. How can you say we've broken away from Bassolino and then a month later they just sign an agreement with Bassolino, and then the Acerra movement at that point will not vote? Let me say at the end that this majority has won. We'll find out in the movements what happened. My opinion is negative, but we'll find this out. But for that, our party must be pluralistic. It must be able to innovate through pluralism and democracy as well. I believe we need a different party from the party that we witnessed in this National Congress too. In a debate that in our party branches has often become just a pattern, the vote counting pattern, with regulations that impose 2 hours of votes. This is a political mistake. I think this party must be pluralistic, democratic, capable of debating on our policies and really using innovation as a political practice and not simply something that is mentioned but then, like last night, goes back to the old practices which in these 5 years we had rejected. Thank you. We thank Comrade Corradi. I have an announcement for the comrades who wish to take a little walk. Between 1:15 and 2:15, the local party branch of Rifondazione Comunista in Lido di Venezia has organized a bicycle race, a bicycle tour, which is in fact a protest against Mose, the dams, and against environmental destruction. So, if you would like to take a bicycle ride, this is also a protest ride between 1 o'clock and 2:15 in front of the casino. I give the floor to Comrade Franco Giordano, and after him Maurizio Acerbo.
La relazione di Fausto
Bertinotti's paper has the ambition to redefine the strategy and identity of Rifondazione Comunista. He has tried to redefine a new mass criticism of capitalist globalization, no longer a static, predefined identity separate from being daily put to the test, but an identity which is built through social conflict and social movements. This identity feeds upon the peace movement and pacifism, a new identity where Rifondazione Comunista breaks the walls of self-centered priests of politics, full professional politicians, trying to reactivate a virtual circle between us and society, between politics and social movements. But this challenge is a challenge to all. An alternative to the Berlusconi government would be impossible if we were to break away from social movements and if we were not to accept direct democracy and participatory democracy. The peace movement has occupied the political arena in the country with its extraordinary presence. There are so many people who have demanded the release of Giuliano Sgrena, and in line with previous actions, they express a demand for full humanity, the same humanity which makes us cry for the death of Nicola Calipari, ups and downs of feelings, joy, a sense of freedom, sorrow, pain. This is the meaning of our rejection of war, terrorism, and all the political projects behind them. It is because of the strength of this movement that the oppositions in Parliament have twice asked for the withdrawal of Italian troops and have voted together against the decree that doesn't just refund that mission but continues that mission. If we were to win the elections, there would be immediate withdrawal of Italian troops, and that demand today is more urgent than ever. Over and above our different views on this, with this last vote, there are no doubts about the urgency of this. And the urgency of this dialogue. That is how we want to work. Fully convinced that social movements are pervasive and can create dialogue and alternative policies as well as new power relations. This is how we must act to repeal Act number 30 on the labour market, to repeal Moratti Act on education, to repeal the Bossi-Fini Act on immigration, to demand a new wage policy, a new economic policy to defend and revamp the welfare state. Let me say it very clearly, this is no longer 1996. Everything has changed in these years. You don't just have Rifondazione Comunista, you have social movements, you have vast parts of the trade union movement, civic movements and associations, part of the media, even political groupings used to be part of the Olive Tree Coalition. You have the strong, bigger part of the militants who demand the opposition. They all want alternative programs for peace and against neoliberalism. Without the explicit perspective to have an alternative to the Berlusconi government, we would not stand there. We would not have gone that far. In a region like Puglia, we have worked so much that it became possible and competitive to have a candidate like Niki to represent the unity of the coalition. There you didn't need those principles that you keep, those preconditions that you keep talking about, because the experience there is the fact that he worked in that community, that he was in line and expressed the feelings and the demands of those movements. And express the feelings of those who do not want to feel lost in the world of globalization. If we are firmly rooted in our communities, we can feel part of an ancient and new civilization, the civilization of the Mediterranean, to be heirs and protagonists of a cooperation of integration and cooperation, tolerance and solidarity. Father Tonino Bello, the priest who was a son of that community, would tell us on the other side of the sea around our south, you don't just have undeveloped countries, you have roads across the deserts. There are different prayers, different churches, different languages that cannot be translated. There is a possibility to express a radical critique of globalization, and it can be a mass critique. It is there within our society, it can be there within our institutions. Neoliberalism, as the introductory report said, neoliberalism believes that women and men can be objects to be used for competitive production and for the marketplace. Precariousness, casualization of work, the precarious life, it is pervasive in private life, no sovereignty at any level, depriving people even of common goods such as water, air, energy. The marketplace uproots people, throwing them into the insecurity of competition. The global movement of movements has exposed and challenged the violence of this form of capitalism, which fragments and social pain and makes it invisible and gives it no voice. There is a fragmentation of society into small groups. As Gramsci said, it is not a matter of conquering the separate citadel of politics. Non-violence is not an ethics tribunal, but it is a policy that can defeat the theory of preemptive endless war. It can defeat the totalitarianism of the marketplace. In our notion, the notion of equality is central again, and it has to be, because we're faced with huge inequality and injustice. In the past century, the movements had tried to translate these desires into states, deprived those who had demanded equality of their voices and deprived them of any say. Marx had talked about liberation, equality and liberation. Without both these notions, we would understand nothing about the practice of gender difference. We would not understand the loneliness of so many people in our big cities. We would not understand that there is a loss of social relations, of social interaction, of communication, so forms of physical and psychological isolation in the new forms of labor. If we don't understand this, we would not understand how terrible a suffering it is when the time of your life is just in the hands of businesses. If we don't understand this, we would not be able to identify the process of liberation. We have to redefine a language for freedom and wealth. We have to conceive a different notion of life. And we have to be part of the movement of movements to develop a new labor movement where borders are not the point where the world ends, but where different diverse entities can have a dialogue. And we want our economy not to do away with social cohesion. Maybe people feel lost, but the way to escape it is like the words that you never find a way to say, to refound the notion of equality, liberation, to refound communism.
Grazie al compagno Franco Giordano.
I thank Comrade Franco Giordano, and I give the floor to Maurizio Cerri. Comrades, as often happens to me, I have some difficulty in taking the floor because I come from a Congress where the minority and the majority have reiterated sentences so many times that they have been repeated time and again and have turned into stereotypes. Starting today, I believe that we should speak more freely and openly about the real problems that will be confronting us in the phase that lies ahead or has already started. Comrades, I personally have signed and supported and endorsed and fought in favor of the majority motion, but having obtained a victory in this Congress, I don't think we are in paradise, but we are confronted with a number of problems that go to increase the difficulties of a party such as Rifondazione Comunista, which is in all likelihood the only party that has a legacy of credibility and respect among the new generations, the ones that have rediscovered activism, militancy, and politics on the streets over the years. And this is why I believe that the way ahead is rather complex. We don't have ready-made recipes or ready-made answers, but it is also fundamental that we enter this phase knowing that we need to look into our limitations, our behavior, which is not in line with what is stated by the podium during the Congress, and our faults, which are faults of both minorities and majorities. And there's a point that worries me, and I can respond to Francesco Ricci, who was asking what will communist ministers do if the party government decides to take part in a future war and asks our troops to defend an oil well. Well, I don't think that anybody has any doubt. Communist ministers will leave that government, and they will be welcomed by the millions of comrades, citizens of this city who have raised the flags of peace in thousands of demonstrations and millions of windows. And what is really worries me is the way in which we can counter a re-edition of previous experiences and see to it that the wealth of experience that we've collected over the years can have an impact on an overall definition of the characteristics of government action in our country. It is a difficult challenge, but I think we need to rise to that challenge. And I don't think that there's anything more left-wing in giving our votes to others and allow them to build a government and allow them to write the programs while we hold on to our medals and stick to our positions and feel better and more communist. Since we have been the most consistent and anti-liberalistic force in our country, then I believe that we are duty-bound to place ourselves to the test. And I think that this is important from the standpoint of the position of forces in the government and in ousting Berlusconi. But this is also important out in the streets, in the country. Our Unitarian party will be appointing thousands of administrators, and that is really a test bench for us. The proof of the pudding will be to see whether we can check on the fact that what we've been building over the years can find its place in our role as administrators in the regions where we shall be elected. And we don't need an ideology there. We need to be consistent in everyday facts. We need to be able to lay down programs and not just have sinecures and a false conscience. I think that we need to work hard, and with this work I believe that everyone can contribute, and not transforming Rifondazione, as I heard yesterday and tonight, as a belated re-edition of a neo-Sarragatian party. This is not what we need. We need to prove ourselves in the field with hard facts, with concrete action, and not only by deciding on whether we're a minority or majority. No, we need to act. And when we can do this, we establish a link between politics and society. We give the word politics the dignity that it has lost in the eyes of many. And in the postmodern re-edition of the debate of the 20th century, we speak of others when we speak about reformers. And we must think about ourselves as well. Comrades, if we have a critical attitude to communism, the labor movement, the history of the labor movement, well, that's all very interesting. But I believe that in our debate, some scholars of postmodernity could term pop. We have some invented tradition, things that are the product of imagination, things that would never be accepted in the wake of communism. And we must get new generations to discover our traditions, but we who call ourselves Communist Refoundation should know that within this history there are facts that bear on us, and we are the first who are duty-bound not to deny them, because we want to aim for the sky yet again. I was asked to present a book dedicated to one of the most important intellectuals, revolutionaries of the post-war period in Italy, Raniero Pansieri, who in 1956, after the 20th Congress, after the events in Hungary, wrote, "The affirmation of the current process as a time of break is the only way of asserting historical continuity in the movement." And I believe that this is a lesson which is in character, which is in character with our tradition, and we need to pick it up again, not to reiterate what happened in the 50s, but we need to place our history at the service of a common language. This is the most important difference between the approach we've adopted over the years as a party and the resistance we felt in building the process. It's not yes for government or no to government, or going or not going to Genoa. It was a matter of building with a new language, a new community, a new possibility. Or are we just content with defending our own backyard? And the debate on nonviolence, and I conclude, reminded me of a brief quotation. A very important character in the last century said, "I am a communist who wouldn't even hurt a butterfly," and his name was Gandhi. Thank you. I thank Maurizio Acervo, and I call on Comrade Velio Orto, and I call on Giovanna Capelli to get ready to follow them.
Compagne e compagni.
Comrades,
Con alcune considerazioni
I will dwell on certain matters pertaining to the party, and I'm sorry if I will be somewhat out of tune with the discussion we've had so far. But I believe that some issues, and especially some matters pertaining to the party in Sardinia, should be tabled here at this Congress. I heard that the tension on party issues was not placed at the heart of the discussion or sufficient, and I believe that appropriate attention should be given to this day as well. This is why I believe that it is necessary to raise some points which are relevant to the party in Sardinia, a party that is in a difficult position, a party that has had some leadership problems over these past few years, a party which has held a Congress which was positive and would like to overcome its difficulties, and can do so with the assistance of our comrades in Sardinia, but also with the contribution that can be forthcoming from this Congress, from this party. To be truthful, I believe that the Congress's role was not easy. The 5 motions were not very helpful. They did not bring back a calm atmosphere in Sardinia as we had expected and as we had stressed in the phase leading on to the Congress. And we hope that everyone will acknowledge the will of card-carrying members in Sardinia, and I hope that the party at national level will take stock of this, and nothing odd will be done to re-question everything. If this were to happen, and there were some signals given in Cagliari, all this would be prejudging not only of the opportunity of restoring the climate and overcoming difficulties, but it would also make it very difficult to relaunch a party that would be worthy of its role and the place acquired in Sardinia with the elections of 2004. To be more explicit, the Congress in Sardinia maintained the thesis that the leadership regionally was the result of political artifice and was not appropriate to lead the party. During this Congress, 3,000 people spoke out of the 5,000 who are members of the party, with a participation of 60.20% of the total number of people who are members. And this was an extraordinary participation in voting, and this is of great political importance. It does away with all the accusations and hearsay about the situation in Sardinia, its inability to provide political proposals. And there are 2 other points which are undeniable. The first motion did not pass in Sardinia. The second obtained over 1,300 votes, 43.7%. And there was a significant affirmation of the 3rd and 4th document. and with positions being very clear as the first document required before the conference was held. So please take note of the will expressed by the party in Sardinia, and I hope that there won't be a traumatic effects to change its will. As far as we are concerned, we believe that now more than ever nationally and even more so regionally, the synthesis that was lacking in Congress preparation will prevail. We need unity nationally and also in Sardinia, and above all in Sardinia. In Sardinia there is a need to iron out differences, lower voices, and make the propensity towards unity prevail. Only in this way a plurality of ideas and positions can become a resource and not an obstacle to the party's growth. The balance after the past Congress and up to date, despite the rifts, has been very positive eventually. For the first time, we have more than 5,000 members. We go from 6 to 8 federations, with the building of 2 new federations during this Congress. A tremendous effort which marks the political growth of our party, the extension of its being rooted in the territory, its ability to conduct struggles, to be present in movements, society, and the labor scene. We have obtained 7.4% against 6.1% of the national level and 4.7% in the islands during the European elections. 2% more than the national average and 3% more than the average for the islands. A very positive result thanks to a great job done in terms of mobilization against the war and the American presence in the island to protect the territory and promote development. All these points are at the very heart of the battle for regional development, which in Sardinia is my time already up? Who in Sardinia in the spring of 2004 saw us side by side with the Sardinian coalition and saw us beat the government and the arrogance of the center right, a result which is very important to the Sardinian party. We not only doubled our regional councillors from 3 to 6, but our party was also very much recognized and played an important role to sustain the process for radical change in the island, a result obtained despite the fact that very often we have been hampered by party leadership. The program has led to a political agreement in the coalition Sardegna Insieme. And with the regional organization, we implemented the coastal area saving decree, and we acted against the Maddalena American military bases to go back to the autonomy of Sardinia. Well, please conclude. And this shows the degree of civility that some of our comrades have, even those who belong to our own party. I shall conclude. We are fighting to support in sincerity that the Soro local government support our programs, and within the program agreement we called for an extraordinary steps to be taken in favor of labor, and we ask this also for the regional budget. We shall fight for this to come into being. We shall make no favors to the local government, regional government, and we hope that the same attitude will be struck by the national government vis-à-vis the union. I hope that they will fight to uphold our interests, the interests of workers, of the unemployed, and of the casual workers.
I delegati e gli invitati.
Delegates and guests who support motion number 2 are meeting at 2:45. At 1:45. The floor to Comrade Giovanna Cappelli, and after her Ramon Mantovani. Dear comrades, this National Congress is very specific, and we've had a huge participation of our members in the previous debate. There's a high quality in the platform that this Congress is advocating, so we must accelerate innovation, experiments, and political research. That is why I feel the need to ask that for the work of our party in the future, we should focus on one issue which is very important and very intertwined with refounding communism. The question is the following: what practices, what political action, what processes may develop as an alternative society and another possible world? A socialist alternative where women's freedom is an essential paradigm for citizenship. The relationship between production and reproduction should be the main principle for a new economy which redefines the notion of development and wealth. This question is unavoidable. It is not a question raised by the Women's Forum or raised by feminists only. It must be a key priority for our party, for the forces of the alternative left, for all the actors that intend to pursue change and want to do away with neoliberal policies. Unfortunately, this question is still marginalized. Sometimes it is just quoted as a cultural issue or kept in the shade and in silence. Only the debate on our newspaper Liberazione, which many women wrote in, has broken this silence. We need to innovate our policies and our practices. It's that this is urgent is manifest. In the country we are going to have a very heavy conflict. A referendum to repeal one of the most perverted acts adopted by the Berlusconi government, Act number 40, which is fundamentalist, which is full of hypocrisy, and which wipes out women's self-determination and women's choice. Women's bodies are just seen as containers of embryos. Women's bodies are considered as objects, as functions. And this is typical of globalization. Globalization is has a particularly heavy impact against women. There's almost a low-intensity war against women. A new form of male domination and patriarchy is advancing, full of fundamentalism, hypocrisy. And this is confirmed by Beijing Plus 10, the international conference in UN conference in New York, which is reviewing the results of the Beijing conference. In 1995, the Beijing conference was a historical event for feminism. At the time when it was considered that feminism was finished, and on the contrary, developed important strategies to contrast globalization. At Beijing, governments had taken a lot of commitments, but none of them have been respected. There's a huge gap between those pledges and the actions, and the greatest gap is in the north of the world, in the US and Europe, where neoliberal government policies have destroyed women's achievements and rights in the fields of healthcare, education, and employment and labor. In this emergency, there are international women's networks, old ones and new ones, which are increasingly active, and they have a direct interaction with the new global movement, and part of the history of the women's movement, which is the most important revolution in the 20th century, where women have taken an active leading role in the public arena. Women have sought autonomy, independence, have always been critical of powers and of the patterns of power, the idea of citizenship as something as ungendered, the idea of a democracy which is not gendered, which is sick and deteriorating. Women have broken and disobeyed the rules of fathers, of husbands. Think of Rosa Luxemburg, Alexander Kollontai, or Terza Noce. This is a revolution, and all of us in our party consider this to be a clear legacy of the 20th century. But it has not proceeded along an easy way without conflict or pain. In the 70s and 80s, it produced a turning point, a change of step. And that is what we talk about when we talk about feminism, with the development of a critical culture. But our party has not yet taken on board that culture, that theory, that social practice. That breach of continuity has produced a feminist subjectivity which is increasingly complex and rich, but it is no longer based on the notion of oppression, of women's oppression. It is based on the notion of gender. It insists on the notion of patriarchy, which, as Marx would have it, is related to the origin of family, property, and the state. But at the same time, a gender conflict is practiced within society to civilize social and political relations. This movement has exposed the male domination and the gendered form of domination, and it is also found not only among capitalists but in the left, in the communist left too, and even in the movements which owe a lot of their social practices and political culture to feminism. Lydia Menapace has suggested to the women in the Women's Network in the European left to highlight the conflict with this form of patriarchy. We call it brotherly patriarchy or brotherly male domination. This will be debated in June in Barcelona. But in the meantime, even the terms of this debate have softened. There's a sort of fear to talk about this form of male domination. This highlights our fear of gender conflict. But gender conflict advances democracy and change. Women sometimes automatically take moderate, cautious positions on this. I'm talking about myself too. In these years I have contributed to the work of the Women's Forum in Rifondazione, where we have practiced a mixture of Marxism and feminism, and we practice the borders between these two. It's a legacy which is complex, and it is difficult to pass it on to others. When Bertinotti was talking in his report, there's something which impressed me, a metaphor he used at the end, talking of a relay race and of how to pass a relay to the new generation. It's a fascinating metaphor, a very manly one, because movement and race seems to be the feature, to the tension to reach objective. I cannot find a better metaphor, but I feel alien to that metaphor. I would like to find a different one, more faithful to the words of our collective thinking. Something that does not imply the notion of a race and of running. I apologize for being somewhat alien to that metaphor. It touched me deeply, but I wanted to say this sincerely.
Grazie.
We thank Giovanna Cappelli, give a floor to Comrade Ramon Mantovani, after him Comrade Leonardo Masella.
Care compagne e cari compagni.
Dear comrades, there is something that we haven't talked about sufficiently, either in the Congress process or here. In a few months, there will be a new session of the World Trade Organization, a new round of the WTO negotiations. This is a fourth round. And in the previous rounds it did not succeed. They did not find an agreement about the further expansion of the market, and hence there is tension in the capitalist system, even in these sectors which so far had been penetrated by the rationale of capitalism. This is not just one of the many areas of conflict. If they succeed in what they are trying to do, if they manage to privatize water, healthcare, education, we shall not have economic growth. We'll have greater social injustice, more people who do not have access to drinking water, but the system will be revitalized in some way. The system has met with difficulties because of our struggle. Every government has been made accountable to... The interpreter apologizes, but there is something wrong with the microphone. The voice goes up and down. There have... And the result of this has been a front of 23 countries which stopped the agreements in the last round of WTO negotiations. Has this got something to do with the future of our country? The interpreter really apologizes, but I can only translate the few words that come through. I must say that even a government
con questo problema, con il problema di un'ulteriore espropriazione della sovranità del Paese, con
the interpreters apologize, but we're going to discontinue translation and look for somebody to fix the system, because we only hear half of what the speaker is saying.
a patto che il Ministro degli Interni non lo facesse il compagno Burgio. Lo dico perché se c'è una cosa che non sono riuscito a mandar giù di quello che lui ha detto ieri è stato quell'accenno fuggevole ma pesante, secondo il quale c'è qualche eco anarchica nella critica del potere che noi abbiamo. Io sono fiero di recuperare quella vena anarchica. Forse qualcuno mi accusa di esserlo troppo, è vero, lo confesso, c'è un black bloc dentro di me che si agita, che tenta di prendere il sopravvento, ma spero che nessun compagno abbia uno sbirro dentro di sé che tenti di prendere il sopravvento. Ecco, io penso che sia più importante, più interessante discutere del capitale, di come è fatto, di questa globalizzazione, di queste sue nuove contraddizioni, che dell'ultima dichiarazione di Fassino, di Prodi. E se c'è una cosa che non capisco, non riesco veramente a capire, me lo dico sinceramente, è come alcuni compagni che si alternano a questa citando tutte le cose pessime che dicono Fassino, Prodi e tanti altri, possono contemporaneamente pensare che questi signori siano onnipotenti, e cioè che tutto ciò che loro pensano di poter o di voler fare si debba realizzare automaticamente e che quindi noi non abbiamo altra possibilità che adeguarci, ad ubbidire a quello che loro dicono, ma le cose non vanno più così e credo che se ne siano accorti anche loro, anche Fassino, Belli, e invece ci sono compagni qua dentro che credono poco nella nostra ragione, nella nostra forza, nella nostra capacità, non solo di partito, ma nella capacità del movimento, della società e delle lotte, non per convincerli, ma per costringerli. E poi comunque vedremo, chi lo sa come finirà questa partita, è una lotta quella per la costruzione di un buon programma di governo, non è un pranzo di gala come è stato giustamente detto. Io dico però, dopo aver fatto delle critiche, mi sentivo di farle, le ho fatte ai compagni sebbene sia un tema tattico, sebbene sia un tema secondario, io lo penso davvero, è un pericolo per il partito e anche per la maggioranza. È una calamita potente, molto pericolosa. Il fatto che, come i rivoluzionari, conquistato il potere, invece di promuovere il cambiamento della società utilizzando anche il governo, perfino quello locale, può cambiare noi. E io non ho antidoti, anche perché mi sono molto riconosciuto nelle parole di Nicolò. Antidoto siano i giovani comunisti, la loro fatto che per fare quello che hanno fatto in questi anni abbiano invece incontrato molta diffidenza. E io penso che questa diffidenza abbia coinvolto un po' tutti, anche me. Dico cosa di molto importante. Qui sono state usate molte frasi metaforiche. Il viaggio, perfino Nicolò Pecorini ha usato una io ero con loro, con i giovani comunisti, quando abbiamo tentato di andare avanti in via. Loro quando abbiamo dovuto correre parecchio. Io lo dico apertamente perché tanto i giornali non si parla quasi d'altro.
Grazie al compagno Mantovani. Alla parola il compagno Leonardo Masella. Si prepara Nicola Fratoianni.
Fate la voce, ho persa con la neve. Io, compagni e compagni, dall'impianto analitico e dalle proposte politiche conseguenti della relazione introduttiva del segretario. Prendo un solo esempio, compagni, la questione della guerra, guerra che ha prodotto, a proposito di movimenti, il più importante e straordinario movimento degli ultimi 20 anni. Il compagno Bertinotti ha detto giustamente
Comrade Bertinotti said quite rightly that the issue of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction is a lie, that to find the weapons of mass destruction, the Americans would have to go back home, and that is very effective as a sentence. But why shouldn't we deal with the causes of this war? Why haven't we spoken about the real causes that have led the United States to attack Iraq with that strength? 120,000 Iraqis killed, women and children killed by bombs. The Americans shoot against anything that moves, and the tortures in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. Why is this war so ferocious? we speak in our circle congresses, but what about the national level? We wonder about the causes of the war in Iraq, and we know that it's not the lie of the weapons of mass destruction or the fight against terrorism, but why shouldn't we say that the real cause, and I believe that it is incredible not to speak about it, is the declared will of the United States to militarily conquer all the area from Afghanistan to Iraq, to rule over Asia and the world, and win militarily the leadership of the world for the 21st century. If these are the goals which have been declared by the Americans, and this has been printed in American documents, and the invasion of Iraq has been planned and declared well before the attack against the two Twin Towers, this would in any event have an impact on our country, whoever rules it. And the problem is, what are the political consequences? What are the possibilities? How many are the possibilities that the war, instead of coming to a halt, will extend to Iran? As the Hawks called for with documents in the United States. And what about the Prodi government in Italy? Will we be involved by either sending troops, as we did to Iraq, or use spent uranium bombs, as we did in Iraq? So what shall we do? Shall we use reference to Article 11, which has been infringed by the center-left and the center-right, and also by President Ciampi, who in recent weeks declared that the mission was a peace mission and not a war mission, using words which were similar to Berlusconi.
L'unica forza coerente e controcorrente, è la dimostrazione che avevamo visto giusto, e non per Ciampi. Il punto vero, quindi il primo punto del programma comune, di un eventuale programma comune di governo, deve chiarire senza alcuna ambiguità, senza alcuna possibilità di interpretazione diversa, che l'Italia non parteciperà mai più a nessuna guerra, da chiunque promossa o coperta e sotto qualunque forma, né con l'invio di truppe né con l'utilizzo del nostro territorio come avvenne per il Kosovo. Quindi ci vuole questo punto chiaro, senza ambiguità e senza incertezza e senza possibilità di diversa interpretazione. Inoltre non ho sentito nella relazione introduttiva nessun accenno all'evento più importante e più negativo degli ultimi mesi. Come si fa, mi chiedo, la rielezione di Bush? Non ho sentito un accenno a questo evento catastrofico, negativo. E io non credo che il segretario se ne sia dimenticato, non credo. Non se ne parla, secondo me, ma vorrei appunto interloquire, sentiremo altri interventi, però vorrei parlare di questo evento, l'elezione di Bush, perché la rielezione di Bush è la migliore dimostrazione della fragilità della tesi della crisi del neoliberismo portata a fondamento di un nostro ingresso al governo. Altro che crisi del neoliberismo. Non si può piegare l'analisi di fase alle decisioni politiche concrete, bisogna fare il contrario, bisogna fare una corretta analisi di fase e poi, conseguentemente, prendere le decisioni concrete contingenti. Il neoliberismo non è stato mai tanto forte, come dimostra non solo la rielezione di Bush, ma anche il nuovo attacco ai lavoratori in Europa e persino nell'Europa socialdemocratica della Germania di Schroeder, dove per la prima volta si aumenta l'orario di lavoro a parità di salario. Altro che crisi del neoliberismo, o persino fuoriuscita dal neoliberismo, come ho sentito balenare in alcuni interventi. Così come non ho sentito nella relazione, e anche qui a mio parere non è un caso, nessun accenno alle novità.
The interpreters apologize, but we weren't getting the sound. Now the sound is back, and we shall be resuming interpretation. We have had President Bush's trip to Europe. Now, I don't think that Bush has changed his position about Iraq or the preemptive war, permanent war. But now Bush is being legitimized through the elections by the United States. And this time he has been elected not with a fraud election as happened 4 years ago. And the European Union has stopped with its dissent against the war in Iraq. When the war started against Iraq, France and Germany were very much against the war. Now they bow to Bush, these two countries. This is the new situation. And therefore, we are faced with a new Euro-Atlantic solidarity. European governments speak about a new Euro-Atlantic solidarity supported by Italy, not only the Italy of Berlusconi, but Italy of Giuliano Amato, Fassini, and Nutelli, who for months speak about resuming Euro-Atlantic solidarity with the United States. Movements, of course, have paved the way for contradiction. They have shaken the center-left, but they have not changed the pivotal center of the center-left. And an example is a further shift leftwards of the DS party. They reduced by 20% the internal left, and Craxi is stressed rather than Berlinguer. So this is not our wishful thinking. This is the reality, and we need to discuss a reality. Now, what should our Congress do? Well, it's not a matter of whether we want to be in government or not, or whether we need to go into the
Presidente, tutti risponderemo di sì, ma noi dobbiamo fare i conti.
Major reform or not, as Bettinotti said, but we had to come to grips not with our wishes, but with reality. And we have another question then to ask ourselves. And the question is, right now, in Italy, and not in Brazil or Venezuela or Latin America, in Italy, in Europe, in the European Union, which is liberalistic, do we have the powers that would allow the government to come up with an anti-liberalistic and anti-war government? Does this possibility exist? And my answer is no. I would like this point to be discussed, and I would like to know what people say about these matters, and not only about wishes. I'm sure that the conditions exist to beat Berlusconi, and this is already quite something. We have the conditions to get rid of him, but we don't have the conditions to get rid of neoliberalism and the permanent war of the Americans. Those who assert the opposite should submit not only a wish, but a clear analysis of the world, of Europe, of Italy, which is different from the one I've just given. Thank you. I thank Comrade Mazzella, and I call on Nicola Frattoianni, and followed by Comrade Pasquale D'Angelo.
Provare e riprovare.
Try and try again to shift the pivotal center of politics towards society and movements. To me, move from representation to the direct organization of life and social relations. Reduce the distance from politics and society, between politics and society. These are some of the key words, the key concepts, which describe the very heart of the discussion at this Congress, and what the party has tried to do and determine in these years, or at least how I've envisaged a growth in the party. And about these matters, I would like to say something not about Bush's victory, and I apologize to Mazella for this, but about the victory in the elections, primary elections in Apulia, and not to claim anything for this extraordinary result, but because I believe that that experiment was something that was discussed extensively, written about extensively, but that we have not thought about fully. And I'm saying this because I am convinced that that experiment is highly significant in the rethinking that is going on in this party, in this Congress. I am convinced that the primaries elections in Apulia, where a candidate for president was chosen, and this is something typical to politics, represented the very opposite of the investment into the sphere of politics. They represented fully what I call and consider, compared to my personal history, the development of a movement. Because two matters which I consider pivotal are tabled there. The result in Apulia shatters, I must say, shatters the basic assumption on which the political discourse was built from the majority, the adoption of the majority vote onwards. We thought that a moderate approach, the moving towards the center was required, the reorganization of society and of the movement in politics and its dimension. And this element gives us a new outlook in terms of what is possible. And this is significant to our discussion. As our secretary said in his report, it's not the helmsmanship, the reformist helmsmanship, or the radical helmsmanship. But really, I don't think that reformist helmsmanship is the sole solution, and that a collective agreement should not lead to one result rather than another. Those primary elections represent a significant turning point. When we started discussing primary elections, I myself, like other comrades, said, oh, let's be very careful. What is a primary election? And our first reaction was to distance ourselves from the matter. Now that experiment marks, in terms of majority percentages, a step forward, because if you try to take a step forward beyond or inch forward a little bit compared to what is a given, then you see that the primary elections are an extraordinary time for participation, a time for redressing politics. So you have something that changes politics, and there is an operation which is one of the main axes of our approach in Rifondazione, something that is being discussed here. And alongside this element, there is a move or an inching forward of substantive discussion. In a region like Apulia, and during the debate before primary elections, when we were negotiating things, people would tell me, well, you're crazy, you don't know anything about Apulia. Yes, it is true, I know very little about it. Yet, when we were there, throughout the discussion, we witnessed a rather surprising phenomenon, because we found out that the program of the center left, and not Nikki Vendela's program, was taking step forwards. That one of the largest infrastructures in Europe, which is located in Apulia, wouldn't be privatized. and that within the program of the center-left, there are steps being taken forward on the right to citizenship and about labor. So there is an overall movement because it becomes possible for social movements that would break the past dynamics to shift the axis. And after all these positive points, however, that event causes a problem from now onwards, because it brought to the fore the 2 points of organization and representation. There are many spontaneous committees that were established in Apulia to support the primaries. So committees which in their constitution, in building a political structure, have a characteristic which is similar to the movement and its organization. So my question is, and I believe that we need to reason further on this and be very careful and introduce a more subjective approach. Now, how can we intercept all that? How can we bring this in line with our political drives? Well, I believe that this is a problem point, as it is in our relations with the movement. Because in the relations with the movement, that is a problem we need to counter. We haven't resolved it yet, and in the solution of that problem lies the possibility for a program such as our own, which wants research to be one of its items for its program. Well, it allows us to take another significant step forward, and I would like to conclude. I believe that this experience, like many others, of course, has very much to do with our quest for an identity, for a political culture. It has to do with the experience of new generations, the relationship with the movement. Because, after all, doesn't it link up with our critique of power? Doesn't it have a relationship with our handing over of sovereignty? I believe it does. And so I think that we have a major possibility and a great responsibility, which is that of holding together the ability of this party to advance political proposal and not to discuss identity, political identity. And we have another problem, which is that of seeing to it that, faced with this possibility, our own personal shackles prevent us from taking the opportunities which arise. Because on a trivial matter such as the composition of lists, faced with that, we have difficulties. We have obstacles in terms of organizing ourselves. So if we can overcome these obstacles, we won't miss a major opportunity. We've already obtained one result. We won the primaries. Let us try to win the regional elections.
Grazie al compagno Fratoianni. Alla parola il compagno Pasquale D'Angelo.
We now give a floor to Comrade Pasquale D'Angelo. After him, Chicca Perugia.
Care compagne e cari compagni, è stato davvero un congresso.
Dear comrades, it's really been a difficult Congress. It has confirmed that it is quite extraordinary, and the party has felt this right from the start. And considering the result of this Congress, we notice that there have been many aspects in this process which have been heavily influenced by the majority, which has forced upon us a sort of many heavy changes. There is something unusual, even for a party such as the PRC. We had participation in our local party branches, congresses, over 50%, very high. But the rules said that 2 hours were needed for the votes, and often the results were because of a call to the vote. As is well known, previous Congresses witnessed less participation. And if you look at the number of voters, you see that where there were more voters, there were more votes for motion number 1. So it's passive members who have voted for the majority position. And anyway, the results of the Congress show that disagreement is not to be underestimated. It's 40% disagreement coming from different views. Comrade Bertinotti's view is seen as highly original and new, but it is not new. It can be seen so only if you don't have a historical perspective. This changed position is similar to the changes which in the past had accompanied the conservation and the processes of capitalism, just watering down the alternative, then getting close to capitalism, as the Socialist Party did first and then the Communist Party did. The Socialist Party then deteriorated into Krax's position, and the Communist Party became DS. Politics was seen by these as the art of what is feasible, what is practicable, just as in the Communist Party with the changeover of the name. Over the course of time, the people have continued their challenges, continued their struggle. 40% of our members in the local branch congresses are part of that historical legacy, but they have been seen as alien to the party. This is the position of the majority, 59%, and unfortunately that 59% included forces that are part of the movement against globalization, which is stuck in a reformist position, lagging behind in accepting a class conscience and the struggle against capitalism.
Della sinistra politica e sindacale.
Most terrible responsibilities of the political and trade union left. This is a consequence of a clear class perspective internationally. In a class, we do not intend to do away with our class perspective. This is our opinion, and 59% in this perspective is not a sign of strength, although it is a majority of the party. A substantial part of this party has got a clearer view of that historical legacy, and therefore that 40% is central to the future of the PRC. We must continue refining communism, because our alternative is not just for an alternative society, but for an alternative system. There can be an alternative society, but this will be new only if capitalism is defeated. It depends on how this potential is managed in the life of the party at every level, and therefore there must be a willingness to be a pluralistic front advancing there must be a pluralistic front among the various minorities as an internal opposition in Rifondazione. We must continue this at the grassroots with our members and comrades who have supported different minority motions, have a dialogue, and we will have to see the results of Bertinotti's change, and more militants can support us in support of our historical heritage through a grassroots initiative to permanent internal dialogue and for a key role of people's mobilization. We advocate a class perspective on every objective, and this could give rise to a new political leadership of our party, reclaiming the party, its perspective, its structure, and an alternative to the whole system. In the meantime, we must operate, we must act so that the party is managed differently, because nationally the attempt is a sort of winner-takes-all approach within the party, but at the grassroots we can contrast the trend to make Rifondazione uniform, similar to other political parties, and at that point it will be possible to understand more clearly why the different positions that want our party to be at their position have not merged. A new political leadership could emerge and could agree that we must safeguard the unity of the party, its identity, its alternative, its role in the opposition, opening the way to real pluralism and to the perspective of refounding communism. The party must be reclaimed by our militants who want to take it into their own hands. We needn't reconstruct a communist international. We must move beyond centralized structures. We must be pluralistic. There are militants who have supported the majority views in the PRC. Well, we appeal to them to bear in mind the votes that were expressed by the minority and for the minority. They should bear them in mind, and they should bear them in mind when they evaluate the result of this changeover. We are in the group called October, and we are aware of how difficult it can be to ensure that this party, and we repeat, this party, not another party, overcomes difficulties or becomes something else or disappears. We believe that the party is irreplaceable as a focal point to develop an alternative to capitalism. But at the same time, we are comrades who have learned from our historical heritage, from our historical legacy, and we know that in the hard times in the life of the party, those who chose the lesser evil were always wrong. Those who were not aware of the potential of the militant body were wrong, and those who believed that capitalism could develop into something that does not contrast the need of human beings was wrong. We are deeply concerned. We are aware that changes of policy, if they're not the result of a synthesis and of the pluralism of the party, changes of policy may lead the party to leave behind our own identity and our essential objectives. Those who have gone through hard times in a different way were right. They decided to safeguard the party, to safeguard its instrument and its autonomy. We need to repair the damage done by mistaken policies, and at the same time these people have worked at the grassroots within society, always having in mind an alternative to capitalism.
Poi il compagno Francesco Nappo.
After her, Francesco Nappo. Yesterday we received two gifts. The first was Comrade Ingrau's decision to join our party, the best part of our history, has decided to be one of us, to help us along this difficult path towards building an alternative world. The other gift is the gift that we had waited for so long, Juliana Sgrana's release, but that release ended in tragedy. I do not know if that was intentional, or if it was mere chance. I don't know what happened yesterday. I just know that this is war. In war, the enemy is everywhere, and the only logic is mors tua vita mea. I can survive if you die. How many times will this happen again? How many times to talk about peace we must go to war? Isn't this a manifest evidence of the fact that there must be a link between means and ends? War is the utmost expression of violence. It is the denial of politics. And we should start from this, from peace and non-violence. We must refuse to answer at the same level. We must shift the grounds of conflict. Violence is used to stop the masses from participation, as at the beginning of the second Intifada, when the higher militarization wanted by the Sharon government had a heavy impact against the participation of women, who had a major role in the first Intifada, which was very different. At that point, the best answer is that of those who seek a different way, grassroots diplomacy, or the Israeli refuseniks who disobeyed, refusing to attack the occupied territories. That is where our practical and our practice and theory are both research, and I say practical efforts first and theoretical research. Disobedience, non-violence, critique of power, participation. In this process, we leave behind the main road. I want to abandon the main road. The previous speaker was talking about the main road. No, I won't follow the main road. I want to leave it behind. I want to experiment new paths, unexplored ground. I want to meet new partners. I aim for a horizon, for a perspective, not as a goal, not towards a goal of a society where allegedly there is no conflict. Let me repeat a quote, something I quoted in the Rome Congress. I apologize to the comrades who were there, but it is a quote that I really like. Rosa Luxemburg wrote in 1918, freedom is only for the supporters of the government, for the members of one party, however many there may be. Such a freedom is not freedom. Freedom is always and only the freedom of those who have different views, not because of a fanaticism for justice, but because whatever is instructive, healthy, and purifying in political freedom depends on this way of being, and loses its effectiveness when freedom becomes privilege. Only a free life can imagine many, 1,001 forms, breeds a creative force and corrects mistakes. I believe this is an extraordinary description, an extraordinary vision that can really help us in all our political life. A critique of power, the need to destructure power and to imagine 1,001 new forms. And this leads me to the question of representation and delegation of power. The feminist movement and all the movement now the feminist movement advances point, and other movements have taken them on board. This concerns democracy, the many fora and the forms of democracy. There are many democratic fora, but if we want to move beyond a society which is organized through a pyramid, if we want a horizontal network structure of society and of power, at that point our communities will be the focus of our reconstruction. That is why we have tried to enhance and give value to the experiments for new municipal experiences, new district structures in Rome, and that is why we opened the Congress of the Rome Federation. We opened them up to the real experiences which had been developed by the comrades of the European left in Berlin, in the metropolitan areas of Berlin, Madrid, Barcelona, Paris, Prague, and Vienna. We debated with them for a whole afternoon in our Congress, building on the practice we have developed on the role of local communities, cities in the age of globalization. We have talked about rights and people's rights, starting from the local communities. We have talked about participation as a form of active involvement of everyone, and we've talked of new government, of new local authorities. We have had a very lively debate about our real experiences, and in these days I've heard comrades in the foreign delegations tell us that here they have a positive view of this. They have encouraged us. They believe that we should move forward along this way. We, in that experience, through that experience, have formalized the idea that there should be a network of the European left among people who operate in the metropolitan areas. This initiative in our Rome Congress was very important to me because I have always strongly believed in the value of this instrument, the European left. But the European left should have legs to walk on, and I believe that this is a priority for anyone who leads a local federation, to give strength and legs to our movement, starting from our local communities, from our cities, from our towns, on the practical matters that are to be tackled at that level. Thank you.
Grazie Chicca. Compagno Nappo, si prepara il compagno Piras.
Comrade Nappo, and after him Comrade Piras. Announcements for the local delegations and the various groupings.
Questo congresso ci consegna una prospettiva politica che ha due caratteristiche fondamentali.
And well, we have two main characteristics in this Congress. The first is our place in the center-left, which is not contingent upon a given period of time. And the second is the choice of the PSI to start the season of the center-left in the 60s. The second outlook, which is the political and theoretical one, entrusts to a number of rifts the cultural nature of the PRC. Now, this is affirmed as being not determinant, but the decisive questions which require more study wouldn't presuppose a collective gathering of positive knowledge that is the only one that is authorized by the major turnabouts in the movements. Now, I shall dwell on the political aspect. The idea reiterated in the report of the Secretary that PRC could, inside a Prodi II government, become a point of leverage for reform in social relations and in the form of politics, seems to be totally devoid of foundation. If we need to find foundation in the real conditions of a class struggle or clash, and not in our thesis, the weakness of the Italian bourgeoisie is a point, because faced with the economic decline of the country, there is a hegemony that is held by the bourgeoisie, which directs the two bipolar groups, their choices, their cultures, because this is a standardization of the two different poles that we've been discussing so far. A hegemony without a defined project this is true, but this always happens in transition periods, but this is a hegemony nonetheless. And of course it is a contradiction, but it expresses the political contradiction of our country, where economic and social crises feed social resistance, but do not become a political and institution dialectic that can assure a reform that can pave the way towards new developments based on the autonomy of a movement of change. This contradiction, this change, is due to the resigning of the PC, which is in the Gramscian sense. The birth of new questioning by of the imperialistic globalization and its wars, and our position, of course, is the opposite. But we cannot affirm that the current center-left has been upset by the struggles of these past years until it had a new shape and potential. Nothing substantive authorizes us to believe this. And therefore, any allusion to opposition within the coalition is present in the report of the Secretary. We must accept reality and its contradictions. We need to recognize the importance and novelty of the current movements, of the current struggle, and recognize that they have not changed the basic relations internationally and nationally, nor could they do that by themselves. And to be very simple, it wouldn't be possible to explain the war in Iraq, or the position of Europe vis-à-vis that scenario, or the treaties, or the Balkanstein Agreement, or the counter-federalist approach in our Constitution, or the bipartisan agreement to fund the rearmament of Israel. And before that, we wouldn't be able to understand the quantity and quality of participation on the referendum of Article 18, or the fact that the worst laws in this government, who have been prepared to a large extent by the previous one, have met with significant opposition, but have done nothing to the mass movement that could halt it. And the program, the government, and the movement would become an irrational attitude. What is at stake is a mortal risk for us, which I would sum up as follows. A wrong analysis of the processes of the hegemony would make us underestimate the new neo-corporativism of the Ulivo and give movements political tasks which are appropriate to it, but that they could not carry out in an unfavorable political government environment. So what we suggest is a version of the autonomy of politics in a radical democratic form, with deleterious results to this government, as happened in another context, in other forms, for a power which is much larger and endowed than our own, the Italian Communist Party. And this objective social picture, which traces all that is required to beat Berlusconi and his acolytes and change the dialectics in our country, this unity which is required for all the above reason, cannot go beyond the limits of a political and electoral agreement or alliance. It is a responsible approach. It would be consistent and credible if there were a mass initiative based on the co-appurtenance of the party to the movements, and the exercise of democratic responsibility against the right. Now, in this double field, which is institutional and practical, the party could build an alternative left as an area for cultural political forces that could not be reduced to political and institutional mediation. The majority choice of this Congress, however, was not in this direction. In my opinion, it exercised these problems, and I believe that the deep change in society and the maturity of the struggles will repropose all this inexorably. And to conclude, the choice of the majority sanctioned by the vote on the statute to close the internal dialectic of the party to a complex political situation which is objectively contradictory and therefore can undergo change in different directions, which would all require the fundamental unity of the party. To have closed the majority with the logic of a majority decision has been an imperious choice in substance, but I don't think it was wise or cautious or respectful of ourselves and our reality.
Francesco.
Thank you, Francesco. Michele Pires, and followed by Rosa Talella. The comrades from Apulia for the first motion will meet in the afternoon on the first floor.
Care compagne e cari compagni.
Comrades, if I can, I shall certainly make an effort. I shall try to speak to you about a land which in itself represents the social characteristics and the violence of neoliberalism in an era of permanent global war. I shall speak of Sardinia to pay tribute to a major figure in the Resistenza that we are now celebrating here, a great Sardinian and anti-fascist who now on the 30th anniversary of his war, Emilio Lussu. I am quoting Emilio Lussu, but I could also quote Antonio Gramsci, because I don't think anyone has a right of the firstborn on Sardinia. The three lines in a Congress motion are not enough. We don't think that a trivial listing of the specificity of the Sardinian issue is enough to open a debate or solve it or give any praise to anyone. A comrade of mine said this morning that in Sardinia 156,000 men and women live on less than €530 a month. And I believe that this very effectively represents what has actually occurred in my country in the past 20 years. This cold figure speaks more than many words about the terrible things done by neoliberalism in Sardinia. Many people follow the road of their mothers and fathers. Jobs lost on the altar of world globality. The heroes of the Brigata Sassari, with them, they share despair and seek a future and a job wherever it may be.
Per un giovane è devastante uccidere per disoccupazione, morire d'uranio.
To die because of enriched uranium and because one is jobless.
Noi
The interpreters apologize to the foreign delegations, but the translation shall now be suspended until 3 o'clock to give the interpreters a lunch break. So you can listen to the translation again from 3 o'clock onwards. Thank you.
Ed infine ci toglie la vita, così come la toglie a tante e tanti in Iraq, in Afghanistan e in Kosovo. Noi siamo la Sardegna, compagni e compagne, 35.000 metri quadrati di basi militari, poligoni sperimentali per le cluster bomb, per gli effetti dell'uranio impoverito, per i sommergibili nucleari, le loro scorie e il loro carico di morte, puntato sul Medio Oriente e sulle nostre coscienze, compagni. che della Sardegna spesso vedono solamente il mare. Un popolo e una terra reclutati a fare da cavia nel laboratorio del dominio imperiale, un'immensa portaerei, le coste di cemento al turismo di serie B, le ville abusive immerse nel verde per i VIP, le nuove povertà, i processi di deindustrializzazione, lo spopolamento delle zone interne, il canto del cigno del tessile, la morte della chimica, i processi di precarizzazione del lavoro, dei diritti e delle esistenze. Care compagne e cari compagni, vi chiedo se siamo capaci di capire che la questione sarda oggi fuoriesce dal suo essere semplicemente specificità interna alla questione meridionale, se siamo capaci di leggere quanto accaduto in Sardegna in questi anni, se siamo capaci di coglierne il dramma e il senso geopolitico, saremo in grado anche di comprenderne la valenza di carattere internazionale, quantomeno europeo. Ecco perché ci ostiniamo ad immaginare un futuro altro per la nostra terra, ecco perché riteniamo che una conquista del partito e del movimento come il piano straordinario per il lavoro del 1998 non sia la semplice conservazione di una legge seppur progressista, ma l'affermazione di un diritto a uno sviluppo alternativo qui ed ora, che affermi dal basso in positivo l'opposizione alle politiche del neoliberismo e l'idea di una costruzione sociale del mercato. Apro una parentesi. Devo confessarvi che ieri c'è stato un passaggio del dibattito sullo statuto che mi ha profondamente colpito, lo dico in positivo ovviamente. Ho visto ergersi a campione della democrazia interna chi per 10 lunghi anni in Sardegna ha sistematizzato la logica dei colpi di maggioranza, l'esclusione delle minoranze, l'accentramento del verticismo del gruppo dirigente. Chi oggi parla di apertura perché sta in minoranza, fino a ieri ha praticato chiusura perché stava in maggioranza, nel partito e dall'esterno, nei confronti del conflitto sociale e dei movimenti, riproducendo una modalità di relazione sociale superata dal tempo e dalla storia, spezzata dall'irruzione sullo scenario politico del movimento altermondialista. Prendo atto di questa inversione di tendenza. Evidentemente il Congresso ha avuto un effetto positivo su tutte noi e su tutti noi. Trovo singolare l'intervento del mio segretario regionale, del resto, che da segretario regionale ci si trasforma evidentemente in banditore dell'ufficialità dei dati, tra l'altro che a me risultano diversi. A decretare la minoritarietà di una gestione burocratica ed autoreferenziale del Partito della Rifondazione Comunista in Sardegna si è pronunciato a giugno il popolo sardo alle elezioni regionali, lo ricordo a tutti. Oggi, nei circoli, il popolo della Rifondazione Comunista, che con 1308 voti al primo documento e 1285 al secondo, assegna evidentemente la vittoria alla mozione numero 1 in Sardegna, la maggioranza relativa. Se per qualcuno la democrazia non vale, valga almeno l'aritmetica. È proprio vero, e concludo, che il sesto congresso ha portato una ventata di novità anche in Sardegna. Al contempo la fine di una fase e l'inizio di una speranza. La chiamo così, la speranza in un percorso di innovazione, finalmente, che non può più essere procrastinato, la speranza nella ripresa della costruzione di un partito nuovo, radicato nei luoghi e nei non luoghi del conflitto sociale, capace di una relazione alta e alta con i soggetti sociali, capace di ricostruire la speranza per una terra sofferente come la mia. Emilio Lussu, per noi tutti l'autonomia significa maggiore libertà e maggiore giustizia, trasformazione e conquista dello Stato. Noi intendiamo essere partecipi e non vittima dell'organizzazione dello Stato. Questo partito, che credo che sia quello che ci appartiene a tutti e a tutte, l'abbiamo pensato e lo pensiamo come essere Rifondazione Comunisti in Sardegna. Grazie.
Grazie Piras. Rosa Tavella è l'ultimo intervento della mattinata. Riprenderemo alle 14.30. I primi iscritti a parlare sono Compagno Danini e Titti De Simone. Vai Rosa.
La questione meridionale oggi io, cari compagni e care compagne, la potrei riassumere così. Il capitalismo della globalizzazione unifica strategie e strumenti di oppressione al sud come al nord, unifica abitudini, consumi, costumi e appunti il pensiero unico che tenta di invadere la vita e i corpi, l'immaginario di tutti. e l'impatto ambientale che diversifica gli effetti e in alcuni luoghi, appunto il Sud, provoca dei veri e propri disastri, tanti tsunami che è sempre più difficile sopportare, dimenticare. Come Sara che lavora nel web, Maria, Concetta, Francesca lavorano in un supermercato, in un centro commerciale di cui è piena la mia città, le città della Calabria. Sono giovani e scolarizzate, lavorano tutto il giorno, tutti i giorni, senza sosta, anche la domenica. L'agenzia che le ha affittate all'azienda è anche socia della società che detiene le azioni del supermercato. Alcune di loro vengono qui da altri canali, sono vestite di nero perché hanno ammazzato loro il fratello, il padre, il marito, però lavorano lì, senza tutele e diritti, per poche lire, ostaggio di un padrone, famiglia o azienda che sia, che organizza loro la vita, e loro non sono automaticamente con noi. Nella stessa città il Consiglio Comunale è sciolto per inquinamento mafioso per la seconda volta in 10 anni. I morti ammazzati, più o meno eccellenti, sfilano numerosi di fronte alle facce, a volte indifferenti o impaurite della gente. E nella stessa città 28 sportelli bancari ci parlano di un'economia drogata che non corrisponde alle attività produttive reali. Nella stessa città si sono organizzate di fatto e per legge altri nuovi lager, il villaggio Rom e il centro di detenzione temporanea per immigrati. Sempre in sintonia con l'idea di diritti trasformati in variabili di mercato, è facile vedere dalle nostre parti lo sperpero di soldi per incarichi milionari a dirigenti sanitari, la crescita del lavoro precario in sanità, l'affidamento ai privati di gran parte delle persone non autosufficienti, di quei malati cronici, dei disabili, di tutti coloro che in Calabria oggi non hanno nessuna risposta. Solo che qui questi soggetti non hanno famiglie forti, hanno famiglie povere che vengono ulteriormente insopportabilmente impoverite dalla totale distruzione anche di quel poco di stato sociale che si avevano conosciuto. E anche il ponte sullo stretto, di per sé opera intollerabile e mostruosa, pericolosa, diventa una beffa per chi sa quanto sia difficile la mobilità nel proprio territorio, per chi studia, lavora, viaggia per curarsi. Questo è il quadro desolante della modernità che abbiamo di fronte, alla quale necessariamente e tempestivamente dobbiamo dare risposte per rovesciarla questa modernità, sparigliarla, poterla cambiare. Ma il capitalismo della globalizzazione che ci offre questa modernità feroce ce la offre guidandola, facendola guidare innanzitutto dall'economia criminale e dalla politica degli affari, dalla politica delle carriere facili, della costruzione di fortune personali e familiari sulla gestione della cosa pubblica. Io sono una figlia del Sud che ha potuto iscrivere la sua storia personale grazie alla fruizione di diritti fondamentali, alla salute, all'istruzione, al lavoro. Mio figlio, i nostri figli, i giovani e le giovani ragazze, non domani ma già oggi, non hanno più nel Sud questa possibilità. Nel Sud e in Calabria i figli più deboli e le persone più deboli vivono oggi una pesante emarginazione. Le donne, che sono per fortuna irreversibilmente cambiate nella cultura e nella soggettività, che caparbiamente studiano, cercano lavoro e sperimentano la propria libertà, incontrano la difficoltà del non lavoro, del lavoro precario, di compiti nuovi, di pesante assistenza di tutte le persone non autosufficienti all'interno della famiglia. E in questo Sud della modernità feroce i soggetti del cambiamento ci vengono sottratti, li perdiamo nei meandri del lavoro precario, nella nuova immigrazione, nelle università fuori sede. La Calabria, già impervia con i suoi monti e i suoi piccolissimi paesi, viene oggi da questa modernità ancora di più desertificata, abbandonata dai suoi stessi cittadini. La politica diventa un lusso per noi. Per questo, lì più che altrove, dobbiamo avere una cura particolare di noi stessi, delle nostre idee e delle nostre pratiche. Per questo è importante riportare i diritti al loro carattere di universalità, sfatare quel luogo comune che li vuole oggi ancorati al mercato, ma soprattutto dobbiamo tenere alta l'idea della politica come strumento, come attrezzo per cambiare l'esistente, come legame sociale, come terzo occhio, metaconoscenza, come capacità critica costante. Per questo ne dobbiamo difendere il carattere e lo spirito pubblico, Per questo dobbiamo essere noi a prendere per mano, accogliere le persone che non ce la fanno, fare inchiesta sulle loro condizioni e costruire obiettivi e percorsi per migliorarne le condizioni di vita. Per questo non dobbiamo lasciare che siano solo le organizzazioni del volontariato, le organizzazioni religiose, le cooperative sociali, ma noi comunisti e comuniste nel Sud il riferimento ideale e concreto dei disoccupati, dei lavoratori e delle lavoratrici, dei migranti, dei rom, dei rifugiati politici, delle persone in difficoltà perché malate e non autosufficienti, perché bisognosi di assistenza. Un mondo nuovo deve partire da qui, dal saper parlare a questi soggetti, a queste donne e a questi uomini che sono ormai fuori, e invece noi li dobbiamo tenere dentro il circuito solidale di una casa comune, dalla quale oggi essi sono paradossalmente esclusi. In Calabria vi è un partito brutto, chiuso, degenerato, con gruppi dirigenti trasformisti, un partito senza donne e con pochissimi giovani, ossificato dalle sue stesse ambizioni, un partito che ha dissipato e dissipa le risorse che pure avrebbe potuto e potrebbe utilizzare, le esperienze migliori, le sensibilità più significative. Per questo accade che contro i CPT, alla Mezzi a Crotone, accanto ai compagni dei circoli e delle città, ci sono solo i deputati nazionali, i responsabili nazionali, non i dirigenti regionali, i rappresentanti delle istituzioni. E questo accade su tutto, sui problemi della criminalità organizzata, sulla salute, sui problemi ambientali. Se Nichi Vendola vince nella più nordica delle regioni meridionali, forse la sua vittoria può significare una controtendenza a quel percorso di sganciamento, non solo sociale ed economico, ma anche politico, che ha già fatto dell'estremo sud un altro peggiore paese. Forse dalla sua vittoria, anche di fondazione comunista nel sud e in Calabria, può cambiare. A Venezia è temuta l'acqua alta. Io sento in Calabria e nel sud un'acqua alta putrida e melmosa che ci vuole far annegare. È l'acqua alta della devolution, della criminalità organizzata e del malaffare, dei rifiuti interrati negli aranceti e che galleggiano nel nostro bellissimo mare, ma è l'acqua alta del lavoro precario, ma è soprattutto l'acqua alta di una politica brutta e grigia, modernamente trasformista e indifferente, una politica che con queste caratteristiche ha largamente contaminato noi stessi. Io non voglio affogare in quest'acqua. Sono sicura di esprimere il desiderio di tanti e tante compagne della mia regione. Questo partito, con le sue intelligenze e competenze migliori, deve aiutarci a rialzare la testa, a riemergere per tornare ad essere con fierezza le donne e gli uomini che pensano e costruiscono la propria storia, che consegnano ai più giovani, ai propri figli, alle giovani generazioni la speranza appunto di un mondo nuovo, più giusto, più accogliente, più libero e in pace ovunque. Grazie.
Grazie Rosa. Allora ci vediamo alle 14:30 precise, compagni e compagni. Il primo intervento del compagno Danini, secondo della compagna Titti De Simone. Grazie.